council to order. Will clerk please call the roll? I'm here at 7:30.
Councilmember Wright. Councilmember Price. Here. Councilmember Robinson. Councilmember Siemens. Councilmember Snipper.
Here.
Councilmember Schultz.
Here.
Things have aligned recently, left and right,
Yes, yes.
for a number of things, including some votes. The only scheduling update I have is to let everybody know that we were not able to add an additional meeting into the agenda, but what we did do was clear the decks for reconciliation so that next Monday is mostly reconciliation, and the following Monday, May 2nd, is all reconciliation. So we basically have most of one meeting and all but about 2 minutes of the other meeting for reconciliation discussions.
Okay. Can I ask a question
Sure.
about future agendas? What about the briefing on the SHA response? Is there a time sensitivity on that? Is the money that they have designated for the repave tied to the fiscal year? Or?
Does the city manager, or maybe the deputy city?
We have
I
an
don't-
answer.
Yeah, we'd be happy to follow up on that.
Okay.
We're not clear on that issue.
Okay, and I was
Important to
talking,
know.
and I was talking to the city attorney today about that.
Okay.
So there's some things that we need to follow up on, and I'll schedule something as soon as we can.
Okay, great.
We'll move to public comment. Is there anybody here who'd like to comment?
I'm Catherine Tunis. Just a quick comment. I had a neighbor who posted something today about a sidewalk study in Seattle, and he was talking about the greenhouse gas benefits from installing sidewalks. I have to say that I took a look at the study. It was very interesting. It did not consider the traffic on the street. It looked at the urban parts of Seattle, not the residential parts like we live in here. And the strongest statement in the study is that the biggest factor that they looked at that increased the vehicle mile travels and CO2 was parking changes. Changing the parking rates from 28 cents an hour to $1.19 an hour resulted in, let me see if I can do the math here, about 3 times more improvement in decrease of vehicle miles travel and, let me see, I'm trying to read it, at least twice the amount of a reduction in CO2. So, again, as I know you're going to talk tonight about the speed camera funds, and I think it's prudent to consider that that a policy changes to get benefits is a lot more cost effective for a few $1,000s versus millions of dollars for infrastructure changes that will cause other environmental damages. I think you are smart enough to know that perhaps we ought to be using our money more wisely than on new sidewalks.
Catherine, I have a question for you. You started saying that the study concluded that new sidewalks improved greenhouse gas reduced greenhouse gas production. Is that how you started that?
It looked at
statement?
very limited areas. It did not consider the traffic on the street, so we don't know, and it was looking at the more urban parts of Seattle rather than residential side streets.
And what led them to the conclusion that installing sidewalks reduced greenhouse gas production?
They said that they had done surveys of individuals, households, in terms of how they, over 2 days, how they changed their patterns of travel.
So what I think I'm hearing you say is that if there are more sidewalks, people will walk more?
It says
rather
that,
than take the
but
car?
but there are other ways of increasing people to walk more that are a whole lot more cost effective. And
That's in the same study?
yes.
Okay, so the conclusion seemed to be then, just for me to understand what you're saying, that putting in sidewalks gets people out on the street, and that's good.
I think what I'm saying is that people are out on the street now, walking safely on our side streets.
Not on our side streets, I'm talking about that study.
It doesn't say what kind of streets it are. They're talking about main
Okay,
streets.
so you're
in
bringing up the
urban
study,
areas.
and then you're drawing an inference to what happens here in our town, but I'm not hearing that the study supports what you're saying. I'm just trying to get a sense of the connection between your points about the study and how the study says that installing sidewalks gets more people out, and therefore it's good for it reduces greenhouse gas production.
In
Then you're
urban-
jumping, and then you're kind of jumping to, but in our town, we don't need them. So
Yes.
I'm trying to get, okay, and so the
Yes,
second
what I'm
is,
saying
second
is-
sort of an
right.
opinion. The first is based on some kind of scientific study, right? So I'm having a little trouble jumping with you here. I'm trying to
Okay.
get a sense of
Let
how
me
you
try
brought up
again,
this
and
study.
I apologize if
Okay?
I wasn't clear the first
Good.
time.
Please do.
Is that one of my neighbors was pointing out that this study showed that there was some benefits in terms of reducing vehicle miles traveled and CO2 reduction associated with that. But
Associated with installing sidewalks.
apparently associated with installing.
Well, that's what the study
But
says, right?
it doesn't really translate because they're looking at urban areas
Uh-huh.
rather than residential side streets like we have here with.
So at that point, you're saying that installing sidewalks on our residential streets would not cause people to walk to Old Town, let's say, or to New Hampshire
Can we
Avenue.
wrap up this?
Okay, I have a couple of
I
questions.
don't
I'm trying to
think
get
so.
clear on her points.
Why don't I send you the study?
That might be helpful. You have a copy of the study?
Yeah, it was posted on the Saska discussion.
Okay, thank you. That would be helpful. Okay.
It-
All right, I think I understand what you're saying about the study, and I think I see where you leap as regards our city streets.
The point I was making is that very, very minor costs in terms of policy improvements make much larger gains in terms of reducing vehicle miles traveled.
And that's based on their study?
based on
That's
their
on their study saying that when they
assessment.
increased the parking, the
Fees.
fee for parking, it reduced
Vehicle miles traveled
Okay.
and CO2, and it was much more cost-effective, and it did not destroy the trees that also mitigate climate change.
And that's also in the same study?
Well, they didn't talk about, they didn't consider trees, they didn't consider traffic, they're talking about main streets, they're talking about urban.
Okay, so those final conclusions are your conclusions, but they're not in that study.
No, what this study does say is that they found that the parking, increasing the parking fees was the strongest
Oh.
factor that they looked at in terms of reducing vehicle miles traveled. And there was several times more benefit from increasing the parking rates.
So that was in that study? Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, council comments. Councilman Robinson, you've already had your turn.
No, I was just asking a question or two. I'm very glad to report to my constituents that, if you don't already know, that the Carroll Avenue work for WSSC is going to be flag-based. In other words, that people will go up and down Carroll on one lane while WSSC is doing work on the other lane, and they'll stay on Carroll Avenue. And that's very good news for the residents of Jefferson and Fremont. So I wanted to thank anything that Darrell had to say or do in getting WSSC and SHA to go down that path as opposed to putting the traffic on Jefferson.
Councilmember Clay.
I wanted to let the other council members know that I'm going to post the SHA response to the Ward 2 listservs, so it'll probably generate some discussion of that. I don't know if you guys are going to post as well. But I scanned it, so I'll send it to all of you in case you want to post it as well.
Thank you.
Sure.
So Mr. Peterson's letter?
Yes. And I rode home on the bus today along Ethan Allen, and it was still a very jarring experience today. So that's what I have to share today.
Were there fewer plates today?
You know, I wasn't sitting in the front of the bus, so I didn't see how many plates, but I'll tell you that it was still a jarring experience, and the bus driver slowed way down as he drove over it.
So it's traffic calming.
Okay.
Count your lucky stars. I tried to come to the council meeting tonight and could not come down Ritchie Avenue at all. It's closed off completely.
Why?
Because the gas company is digging a trench across the road looking for a gas leak.
I'm sorry to hear that.
On the other hand,
Wasn't that...
I hope they find it.
Wasn't that devastating?
Councilmember Schultz.
I want to remind residents in Ward 6 that this coming week, not this week, but next week, there will be 2 meetings on the subject of sidewalks held in Ward 6. One meeting is going to address the proposed sidewalks on Wildwood Drive, for the entire length of Wildwood Drive from Carroll Avenue all the way down to the Glenside Circle. And the other meeting will be addressing solely Erskine Street in the Hillwood Manor area. They'll be on separate nights next week at the Rec Center starting at 7:30, as most of those meetings usually do. I will again, there will be notices going out from the Department of Works, Public Works, being put, I'm told, into people's doorways. You can also look for reminder emails from me and other sources. So these are important meetings, and I will mention it again at next Monday's City Council meeting, because it's just really important that we get a good turnout if you have concern at all about sidewalks and how they may affect your particular property. That's all. Thank you.
City Manager, have any comments?
Just one. Obviously, we will start the reconciliation process on Monday. I would just reiterate my request. If you have any items that require staff to develop budget figures, price out, if you could please get those to me as soon as possible. We'd just like to try to have as much information as we can for you Monday to make your discussion productive.
Were you trying to get those by, say, noon tomorrow?
Yeah, if there's something that you already have in mind, I know that Councilmember Schultz had mentioned some additional trash cans, recycling bins in Ward 6. I have the figure for that. And Councilmember Snipper, you had brought up something regarding leaf vacuum, leaf collection services. Those are the 2 items I have at this time that we have already priced out, and I will get that information to both of you.
Okay. So we will move to the budget work session, and the first of the 3 areas up is Housing and Community Development, and we have the Director of Housing and Community Development at the dais, if you want to lead off.
Good evening. As noted in the memorandum that the Council received this evening, there's very little new and exciting to report in our particular budget. Given some of the financing constraints that we have very few new initiatives that are proposed. However, what I would like to do is just give you an overview of what the money is being used for that's included in the budget. I think overall we have probably a 2 or 3% budget increase, and some of that has to do with some of the reprogramming of the funds from what historically was considered a capital project and is now included in the operating budget. You may know that we've got 5 different funds that we are included within the Housing and Community Development Department: the Administration, Code Enforcement, Landlord-Tenant, COLTA, the Planning or Community Development Departments, or Planning and Community Development Areas budget, as well as affordable housing. Starting with the lowest number, the Code Enforcement Division, many of you have exposure to that. And as with many of the city's budgets, the majority of the funding for that are we're experiencing a 5% increase in that particular division's budget, due in large part to an increase that we've received from the county for their contractual services that they provide to us for rental housing inspections.
How much did it go up?
5%.
And how much? What's the number?
I think it's about 50,000.
50,000. Wasn't it 170 before? Or 190, somewhere in that?
They bill us out on a different schedule each year. So, I mean, their flat fee does not correspond with our fiscal year, so it may vary. But right now, they're billing us out at $190,000 more or less. And last year, I think I had it about 180.
So 5,000 would be about $10,000 more.
Yeah.
5% would be about $10,000 more. Is that right?
Correct. Last year, there was very little, if any, increase in the amount that they billed us. And actually, if I recall correctly, there was a decrease in the fee.
So it's
It
going
went
from-
down last year.
Okay, so it's going to go from 190 to 200 or something like that? Is that what you're saying? 5% increase?
No, it's 190 right now.
Yes.
It will be 190.
Okay.
Right now, it is roughly 175,000.
Okay.
And the year before that, it was more than 175,000. So it's been fluctuating a little bit. That makes up roughly 51% of the, or 50% of the overall department divisional budget.
Excuse me, on the materials, it says 191,400.
I round up to round, or I go to round numbers, so it's 190,000.
Right.
This past year, it was about 180. Prior to that, it was higher. So now I've started you off in a very confused route. I apologize for that. Basically, half of that division's budget is for contract costs. It includes Montgomery County's inspection services, as I noted. We also have included in this particular division's budget funding for clean and liens or demolition activities. We have dropped that down dramatically this year to make the numbers work. So whereas in FY11 we have about $35,000 budgeted, we're setting aside $13,500. And if there were any larger projects that came before you where we were required to do some extensive work, we would ask for additional funding from you. At this point in time, I'm not anticipating that need. In the past, we have torn down houses, but we're trying to do our best to avoid that and to do more smaller clean and liens. Again, it just depends on what the activity is required for a particular property. This is one of the few funds where we actually have revenues that are generated. So the rental housing licensing program, which is a primary focus of the contract with Montgomery County, is basically self-supporting. There are license fees paid for the cost of the contract with the county and staffing costs associated with this particular activity.
Where is that shown on the...
Revenues go in a different budget?
Yeah, the revenues are just considered general fund revenues, but as far as the summary of revenues that are generated through that, it's shown on the department summary page, the one with all the numbers. I think it's probably the first page on your tab for the HCD.
Thank you.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. So we basically have in this particular division activities divided between rental housing licensing and general code enforcement. We've seen a decline in the number of licenses that we're issuing and that we're forecasting for next year. That's due in large part to an increased number in the biennial licenses that are being issued. Housing conditions are improving, and as a result, if they meet the threshold requirement, they only have to license once every 2 years as opposed to every year. We have also seen, this past year we've seen a decline in the number of inspections that the county did, but that was due in large part to basically Hampshire Towers going offline. We anticipate that going back up and that the numbers will increase again to roughly 3,100 inspections that they'll be doing for the city in FY12. There are a couple of other things that the division does under this category. We close down and vacate illegal rental facilities. There's one in Ward 5, I believe, right now that we have boarded up and monitor on a regular basis to make sure it's not being re-rented. We will do that when push comes to shove and the property owner is either not complying with the abatement orders, not providing access, or licensing their property altogether. We are also including under this activity our online licensing software program. It's something that we rolled out in FY11, which has been met with enthusiasm from the property owners. Not everybody likes it, but we're doing our best to work with them individually to either help them with the input over the phone, having them come in and sitting down with them and actually doing it for them. But about 90% of the people that are renewing their property license applications online are very happy with the process. It's much more streamlined, and it's increases the turnaround time as far as the actual issuance of the licenses. The other primary area under this division is property maintenance code. And here we accept complaints from the public at large, council members, et cetera, as well as we go through and do more of a focused inspection program in the various wards. Roughly 30% of our complaints or inspections that we conduct are initiated by the community at large or city council members. The balance are property deficiencies that we've identified by staff through the focused inspection or the targeted inspection program that we do. A majority of the complaints that we get are addressed first time around when we issue a courtesy notice. It's basically the door hanger. Roughly about a quarter of the complaints that we get from the public are resolved once we've issued a notice of violation, which gives people a defined period of time to abate them. With the targeted inspection, it's a similar type of turnaround or expectation as far as correcting the abatement. We are experiencing some delays in certain neighborhoods, however, where the property owner may not be as may not have the same resources or have access to the skill sets or sufficient time to do some of the code repairs. So there we're seeing we're having to go more to the court process. Other things that are done in the Code Enforcement Division that are not necessarily very clear in the budget is we remove signs and flyers from utility poles and across the area. We projected out about 600 being removed in FY12. Staff went out 2 weeks ago, and 2 of them tore down 250 signs in a matter of an hour and a half, so we'll probably exceed those numbers. Unfortunately, they were back up the next week, but we keep taking them down. We do clean and liens. And that ranges everywhere from the tarps to boarding up or removing trash and debris, and that's what the 13.5 is set up for. We also do more active engagement with certain properties to ensure compliance with court abatement orders. And there you'll see where we issue demolition bids or requests for bids for properties that have been ordered to be sold. And we do a lot of education and outreach, make referrals, and are becoming more actively involved in the county's efforts to address hoarding problems, which are becoming increasingly evident as people go out in the properties, either through the police department, fire department, or code enforcement officers. The other 2 funds that are sort of lumped together as far as landlord, tenant, and COLTA are equally familiar to many members in the community. And this is basically 2.5. There's 2.5 people that are involved in this particular area. We have, as a whole, about 2,700 contacts with the public each year, and a majority of those are they're sort of equally divided between landlords and tenants. It's not a majority of tenants, it's not a majority of landlords that are contacting us, so it's fairly evenly divided, with the majority of those questions either being general housing-related questions or focusing on rent stabilization. Also included in these 2 funds are Rent Stabilization Act monitoring. Again, we have the online reporting system that's been very popular, where we monitor the rents that are reported for roughly 260 properties. At the moment, we have 11 properties that have long-term exemptions from rent stabilization. That would be like the Essex House or Hampshire Towers, properties owned by MHP. But then we also have a roughly 29 to 30 each year that are renewed because of their contractual obligations with HOC. So we get a lot of people reporting the rents. We also get a lot of people that have to comply with all of the requirements for exemptions from rent stabilization. Based on these efforts, since the beginning of this year, staff in this particular area has been able to get rent rebates or refunds of roughly $12,000 for tenants that were being overcharged for rents. So that's not a bad way to start out the first quarter of the year, and we'll see how that evolves or develops over the next 9 months. Most of those are from Hillwood Manor. We also deal with the COLTA, Commission on Landlord and Tenant Affairs, where we do a lot of mediation of complaints, and many of the complaints that we receive for that, again, are illegal rents that are being charged and security deposits are the primary complaints. Due to the staffing for this particular area, roughly half of those cases that make it to that point are mediated before they're actually heard by the board. We have other things that are done under these two divisions are we provide emergency services. Some of those funds come from the stormwater management, where the community makes contributions on behalf of other residents that may be in need for housing, medical services, et cetera. And then the council also has, I believe, included in its non-departmental budget, funding for similar types of services. In the last year, we've $21,000 have been distributed to 50 households. A majority of those are going to folks in Ward 4 and 5. And that's a contract that we administer with MUST, Ministries United Silver Spring Tacoma Park. Other things that we do that are included is just general operating. We do credit checks for landlords. They get the first one free. We do workshops for tenants as well as landlords. We do a lot of community outreach, everything from newsletter articles to flyer distribution to meetings on site at some of the larger properties. Next is the 5400 fund, which is community development.
Before you go there,
yeah.
can I just go back for a second to the beginning of the discussion where it was about the inspection fees and the licensing and the kind of balancing of those. I just want to make sure I understand something on the first page in the Housing and Community Development tab in the budget, where it's got the departmental summary. And the chart on the top right of the page has source of funds. Is that supposed to be revenues or expenditures in that table?
Those are revenues.
Well, that's what I thought, but then the revenues match the expenditures exactly? That never works. That never happens.
I can answer that, Mayor Williams. What is intended to show is what activities related to a particular department generate revenue, and arguably what portion of that
Comes from
particular
general
departmental budget is funded out of other general operating
So
budgets.
it's an extrapolation.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
So it's supposed to match.
Okay. I thought that's what it was, but then it didn't make sense because things don't match. Thank you.
Also, other revenues that are generated by the Code Enforcement Division are the municipal and landlord-tenant are the municipal infraction fees. Those are basically the fines that people pay, range everywhere from $250 to $1,000. They can be waived, they can be cut in half, and we've seen an increase in the amount of revenues that are generated by that, due in large part to more aggressive enforcement, judges' increased support of efforts to improve quality of life in various communities, and larger number of people that are just not playing by the rules and will not work with us to address whatever the problem is that has been identified.
So the rental application fees are not included in your department. Those come in through the general administration?
They come in as a general fund. They're counted in general fund. They're acknowledged here, but they're included in the general fund budget.
But as far as source of funds, it would be under the general fund line.
No, it's the inspection fees, which is the rental licensing fees.
No,
Yeah.
those are two different things.
Correct, but the way they're, for whatever reason, Councilmember Siemens, in the city's chart of accounts, which was set up before I got here, they're listed in the general fund revenue detail as inspection fees, so we're talking about the same thing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I apologize.
Sorry, Mayor, did you have another question related to this?
Councilmember Clay had a question.
I just wanted to say, mostly to the other council members, actually, that it's, I don't know, how long has it been since we added the second code enforcement person?
A year and a half, I think.
Year and a half. So yeah, it's about 2 years ago that we decided that we wanted to have a second code enforcement person, ostensibly to help with code enforcement, really in Ward 6.
That was the impetus, was Councilmember Barry was pushing
Yeah,
for.
in Ward 6. And to point out that we continue to have, I think, challenges with the arborist and the education activities of the arborists, and we've had a lot of constituents who would really be interested in having more focus on education and outreach and consultation from the arborist, but my understanding is that there's a lot of enforcement activities, and that actually when the arborist cites somebody, every citation takes something like 40 hours, and so I just wanted to put it out there. I wonder if there's some way that if we might want to make an adjustment there. So I just want to...
What would the adjustment be like?
Well, I don't know if we can we share some code enforcement between Public Works and our...
My staff right
HCD
now
people?
is swamped. We also do not have the training or the expertise for the tree ordinance. And in the past, when the line was sort of gray, we were encouraged not to issue citations because, frankly, we don't know anything about trees. We don't know anything about invasive plants. We don't have the education and all of that. We have provided training to other departments about the whole infraction process, how to write citations, how to prepare for court, et cetera. And we're prepared to we can do that.
Right. When you hired the last 2 code enforcement people, did they have experience in code enforcement, or did you train them? Had they been code enforcement officers before, or did you train them into the position?
The last 2?
Yeah. The 2 people who are currently code enforcement officers for the city.
Both of them have inspection services, whether you want to call it code enforcement. One, they both did private inspections for either developers or for Americans with the Veteran Services or other housing-related agencies.
Housing activities.
You're right. Okay. So not necessarily experience writing tickets, but doing the actual inspection process and familiarity with basic building codes and other things. One of our inspectors is an architect and is certified for a lot of green building activity as well as ADA stuff.
Which one is that?
In addition to Margie.
Who are the code enforcement officers?
Code enforcement staff includes the supervisor, which is Margie Saccone, who also does inspections, oversees the management of the contract and all the educational stuff. Walter Garcia, who is the new person. And then we have Clifton Boma, who is primarily administrative staff, though on nice days we send him out to pull signs down. So we have technically just one inspector, with Margie serving multiple roles.
Okay. A couple of other council members have questions. Councilmember Wright.
Yeah, I just had questions specifically about the inspection fees. So you said the amount that the county is charging us is going up in terms of carrying out the inspections, correct? Are we also increasing or proposing any increase in the inspection fees to cover the cost of that?
The increase in the fees is governed by the city ordinance, and there's an inflationary factor included in the text. And so every year we go through and adjust the license fee. It's not an inspection fee, it's a license fee. And that's tied to 100% of the CPI as of September 30th or something like that. So last year it went up just $1. Based on the increases that we're seeing for the annual rent increase allowance, it may go up 3% for FY12, which would kick in on January 1st, 2012. The license cycle doesn't correspond with the city's fiscal budget.
So I just want to clearly understand this. Are the fees, whether they're licensing or inspection fees, do those cover the costs of what we have to pay the county?
Yes.
And then they also cover beyond that, or no?
There's some additional funding for that. At some point in time, it's not going to be, we'll have to go through and evaluate the license fee. The challenge is, while it's called an inspection fee in the book, you could have 12 inspections for one property, but only one license fee. And other properties, you have one inspection and one license fee, and that's it. So it just depends on the condition of the property.
But the cost, what we charge in license fee covers the cost of conducting those inspections.
Correct.
And does it cover a little bit more? I mean, is there money left over, which we then, I think, we talked about this last year, can be used on, in theory, the COLTA process or other things related to enforcement of
I'm going to look to Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong. You're correct, Councilmember Wright. It's been a year or so since I remember you all talking about this in some detail, but Sarah had kind of worked up some numbers at some point during my tenure, and it was kind of the fee paid to the county, some staff time associated with the actual rental licensing process, and it did cover its cost.
Right.
And if I can just add that, I don't remember how long ago, but at some point, I'll say 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, the council had a fairly involved discussion about wanting the fees to cover the costs and set up the inflation, kind of an automatic increase to try and keep track with it that would track what the costs were, so that we didn't have to keep revisiting, because in the past, we'd have to come back and change it every time.
Right, and I remember this discussion, you pointed it out last year as well, Mayor, the discussion being that there's a question in my mind about whether it covers all the true costs of supplying that service, because if someone has a complaint, they're then going through the COLTA process, which is costly. And so...
Very rarely, I think there was just one COLTA case that we had last year that was dismissed because we were able to mediate it. Very rarely do any of the cases that go before COLTA have anything to do with the property maintenance code or the rental housing licensing process. They generally have to do with security deposits and other things that are considered to be landlord-tenant. The license fee that we're getting, we're projecting it out to be $295,000 in FY12. That gives us roughly $104,000 above the cost for the contract with Montgomery County to cover monitoring the contract, issuing the licenses, going through court to deal with folks that do not secure licenses, and it also, the last time I evaluated, which was about a year and a half ago, addressed what we estimated to be the cost of actually doing the billing. So right now, it's the revenues or the fees cover the costs associated with the rental housing licensing program. The county licensing fee covers COLTA, landlord-tenant, and a variety of other services. They have a different level of licensing program than we do. For example, they go through and inspect properties once every 3 or 4 years, I believe, except in certain neighborhoods. In Tacoma Park, it's once every year or once every 2 years, depending upon what type of a license you have. So there's a greater expectation in terms of compliance with the property maintenance code over a longer period of time with our current licensing program as opposed to the county. They also have different rules and regulations regarding landlord-tenant that may be less time-intensive and staff-intensive than we have.
I'm not interested so much in a debate compared to what we do versus the county. I think it's good that we have the inspections more often. I was just wanted to make sure that
it covers
the true all-in costs of running the effort are covered by the fees we charge the landlord through the inspection process.
Yes.
You're confident of that?
I'm as confident as I can be.
Okay. I guess we'll ask other questions when we get to the end. We just seemed like we were delving into that a little bit. I have other questions, but I'll wait until the end to raise those.
Okay. Councilmember Robinson, then Councilmember Schultz, and Councilmember Siemens.
I have questions about the safe routes to school, but we haven't really gotten to that, so maybe I'll just wait until the end on that one, too.
Councilmember Schultz?
I noticed that we have workshops for tenants, and we have workshops for landlords to familiarize both sides of the tenant-landlord relationship with the rent stabilization laws and their duties and responsibilities. But I'm wondering if do we ever do workshops with community leaders? And the reason I ask that is that with the code inspection that's been going on in Ward 6 and a good deal of resistance to compliance, I think it would, and I've noticed that there's been a lot of confusion and misunderstanding among property owners and some of our neighborhood leaders as to how this gets done and why it gets done and that sort of thing. I've tried to explain it to people more than once, and I've seemed to have made very little headway. And I was just thinking out loud here if it makes sense, if it makes sense to think about doing a workshop for the people that say property owner, homeowners, in other words, not landlords, in a community, which might benefit might benefit the city by helping people become more compliant with the city's code enforcement activities.
We would be more than glad to go to any neighborhood meeting and address that as a topic. My concern about having it as a seminar or a workshop, I'm not sure unless people were compelled to come that they would actually come or attend. The landlord certification seminars, for example, it's mandated you have to go. So we get good turnout for those. The tenant rights workshops are more informational, and unless there's a large issue that's going on in a particular neighborhood or building, turnout varies from a handful to a larger number of people, depending upon where it's held.
It's just frustrating because on the one hand, everybody wants to protect their property values, and yet when they get an inspection notice that they have to maintain their property in a certain, make an improvement, then I hear certain howling about why me when there's such and such a problem across the street and all this kind of stuff, which I realize is not new. But so I will leave it at that. Just a thought.
Councilor Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. Sarah, in June, I sent you a list of properties that are not owner-occupied, and it was considerably more than we have rental housing licenses for.
We've gone through and cross-referenced it with the licensing program. I have not had the staff to go out and do field inspections to see which of them are empty fields or commercial properties or owner-occupied or whatever. So
have you sent a letter to those addresses, to those owners, to say that,
actually, I have a draft on my computer, but I haven't sent it out yet.
Excuse me, to advise them of what the law is and tell them that they need to register if it is a rental property?
We can do that. I actually have one drafted, but I haven't sent it out yet.
It's been like a long time, 10 months. I mean, that's revenue for the city for the housing department, so it seems like it'd be appropriate.
We can do that.
Okay, next section.
Jumping to 5400, which is the planning and community development area. Again, there are no significant changes in the actual budget. There are it's gone up roughly $12,000. That is due in part to the programming of funding for the ongoing gateway and identification and wayfinding sign system from capital budget into an operating budget due to the price of the individual signs. So roughly the budget itself is flat. Right now we have, if you'll note in the upper left-hand corner of the summary sheet for this particular division as far as staffing summary, we have lost a number of folks, and as a result have scaled back some of the outreach and activities that we've been undertaking and are no longer doing some programming. What we are doing is focusing on development, issuing permit letters as required by, we're issuing permit letters. Individuals who own property in Tacoma Park who are interested in getting a building permit from Montgomery County cannot get a building permit until they come in and talk to us or contact us, so that we can walk them through the local requirements as far as the tree protection ordinance, the stormwater management system, and other permits that are required at the local level. This past year, we're estimating that in FY12 we'll be doing about 190 of those letters. This step was initiated when people started doing work, assuming that they had all the permits that they needed, and then would get a fine from the city arborist, for example, for $1,000 because they weren't complying with the local ordinance. And we tried a number of ways to coordinate that at the county level, but it was not consistent. And as a result, we're now issuing these permit letters. And we've been doing that for a couple of years. Other development activities are focused on development review, where we will work with the property owner and the neighbors to become familiar with projects that are planned. And those have ranged from projects on New Hampshire Avenue, for example, at 6430, where a new laundromat is being proposed, the property up in the Long Branch area in Ward 6, where the Chinese restaurant is, and others on Geneva in Ward 4, and then over in Orchard Avenue near Councilmember Siemens' building. We also do, under the development process, master planning activities in cooperation with Montgomery County's Planning Department, as well as initiatives that we've taken on our own. And again, those range from the Tacoma-Langley Crossroads Sector Plan, include the Long Branch Sector Plan. We're getting involved in the rezoning code rewrite and have been engaged in conversations regarding the new commercial residential zone that the county is in the process of developing now. Included in this budget are also the activities that we're continuing along the New Hampshire Avenue corridor. Primary focuses next year will be engaging the community and continuing to do outreach to the property owners, the business owners, developers, and residents along that stretch to keep them informed as to what's going on, to make them aware of the opportunities for redevelopment or development, and to keep them engaged in the whole sector planning process and aware of the zoning rewrite implications. We're also working as part of that to promote or facilitate the implementation of the concept plan that was done for the lower half of New Hampshire Avenue. And we've got a number of smaller improvements that are planned. Facade improvement facade easement program that's being funded through the Community Development Block Grant Program. We're doing some community gardening projects. Hillwood Manor, for example, is the most notable project along that stretch. And then we also have included in the capital budget as a potential use of speed camera funding the initial survey, engineering, and design work for streetscape improvements along East-West Highway at the gateway there. If you've been down there, not only are the road full of potholes, but if you're a pedestrian, there are no sidewalks, or the sidewalks are substandard in that area. And what we're hoping to do is to do the preliminary work that is required so that we can submit a successful application to the state for funding to actually do the implementation. So by completing that pre-development work, we'll have the resources available to turn the grant funds over, because right now you have, generally they want us to spend down all the money in 12 months, and without having done that preliminary work, it's impossible to do. There's also ongoing marketing, including the New Hampshire Avenue website and a variety of other materials that we're distributing. Included again in this division are the business support that we provide for general technical support and referrals for businesses, to all of the work that we're doing in the Old Main or for the Old Tacoma Business Association. There's $30,000 in this budget for that particular operating subsidy, which I believe has been identified by the council. And additional support to the various Main Street committees, the Tacoma Junction Task Force, for example, and then the Facade Advisory Board would also fall into that category. It would include the support that we provide to the Tacoma-Langley Crossroads area. Another big thing that's included in this area that is very staff intensive is a lot of the intergovernmental coordination that we do for a variety of projects, most notably the transportation projects, the K6 Priority Bus Corridor, the Purple Line, the Transit Center, and then again working with the transit providers as far as the bus shelters and signage and things like that. We have the Safe Routes program that falls into this category as well, and that's a grant-funded program through the state. And those activities range from crosswalk simulation to the 5K race that's coming up on May 1st. We do Crossing Guard Appreciation Day in May, which is a big hit. We also do the Walk to School Day, which many of you have been involved in. And one of the projects that will be funded for next year through these grant funds would be the installation of bike racks at the various schools that are within our service area. Last but not least, we do a lot of grant writing and grant administration. We went through and tallied up the amount of grant dollars that we've been responsible for over the last 5 years, and it equals about $2.2 million. This upcoming year, I think, we'll be administering and managing projects that are funded with grant funds, roughly $500,000. Some of these funds are automatically provided to us through the Community Development Block Grant Program. Others are competitively secured through the efforts of the division, staff in this division. And then miscellaneous, we do cultural programming. We coordinate with Farmers Market in terms of the determining fees for the Tacoma Old Town Farmers Market and administering all of the different agreements and funds that the Crossroads Market get. And that gives you kind of a snapshot of what's going on. Most of the stuff is not clear when you actually look at the budget because you just see big numbers, but those are the various things that are being done by this little less than 3 people.
Councilor Robinson, you had a question?
Yeah. Which department in the state gives us the Safe Routes to School grant? Do you know where that comes from?
The MTA, I believe.
That's the Transportation Authority?
State Highway Administration. They have, just to clarify that, the funding for the state Safe Routes to School program was a one-time infusion, or has been an infusion of funding from the federal government. It was a big pot of money, and then each grant cycle they have been expending funds from that original allocation. We have checked, and to our knowledge, we have checked. No one at this point in time is aware if that those funds will be reallocated again for future Safe Routes to School activities. If not, then the funds will, once they're gone, then we'll no longer be able to do these activities under that scenario.
Okay. And the 117, I see in the Safe Routes to School, there's educational programming, and I heard you mention some of the outreach that you had done for $117,000, and capital improvements of $135,000. Does the $135,000, is that the bike racks and the crosswalk improvements?
Those would be the sidewalks that are in the process of being designed at this point in time. It's not the sidewalks, it's a sidewalk that was part of the original capital improvement project that was approved for this community.
I'm sorry. I wasn't clear on that. There's a sidewalk that's going to be built with $135,000. Is that what you mean?
A very small part of a sidewalk that will be built.
Small part of a sidewalk.
Yeah. They've gone through and done the initial design work and have been working with the community on that. And it's
where is that? Which sidewalk is that?
Which one? Hillside.
And Wildwood.
And Wildwood.
Are for construction, and Central is just design.
Okay. You coordinate with Public Works probably getting that done.
Yes.
Okay, and so this Safe Routes to School is a grant-funded program, and it may or may not continue. That's really what I was after. And if it doesn't continue, will it impact us as far as staff is concerned? Will we have to consider funding a staff position to cover what is being expended in the Safe Routes to School program currently?
Correct. One of the options that's been presented, I believe, is to allocate some of the speed camera revenue funding for the Safe Routes to School coordinator.
And the Safe Routes to School coordinator, that's one staff position?
That's one person.
Okay, and their day-to-day job is reaching out to school kids to make sure that they get to school in a safe manner, as in accordance with the dictates of the grant. Am I right on that?
They do a variety of activities, but that's a primary focus. It's, I should point out, it's not a whole person. It's basically a contractual employee who works on average of 10 to 12 hours a week. We're hoping to increase that with this latest round of grant funds, and that the number of hours per week varies depending upon what's going on with the program at the point in time.
Okay. Thank you. That's my general concern about grant funding, is that when it runs out, then what do we do? And so that's why I bring it up now.
Yeah.
Councilmember Snipper.
Thank you, Mayor. Did I, it's a question about community development block grant money in the future. Did I remember correctly that that's being cut?
It's being slashed. I will not know exactly how much it will be reduced, and I think I've got a meeting I'm going to in about 2 weeks that will be, I can be more informative about that.
Can you just remind me where that tracks in here?
The community development block grant funds fall under the special revenue fund.
Oh, okay, because I couldn't find it in CIP. That's what I was looking for.
Right now, that funds projects for the Crossroads Farmers Market to the $31,500. Manna Food, excuse me, Manna Foods is receiving $5,000 that's budgeted for FY12. We have a facade easement program that's budgeted at roughly $60,000. And then some funding for the scholarship program through the rec department. I am anticipating a fairly significant cut in budgets, mostly due to how the program is, the formulas that they're using, plus then the recent budget reduction
$600
measures.
right,
Yeah.
CDBG.
Right.
Yep. So even before they cut that, Montgomery County was anticipating significant reduction.
And do the Republicans on the Hill remember that this was a Nixon program?
I haven't had that conversation with them.
Bruce.
Any other questions in this area?
Are we going to continue with affordable housing, or is this the end?
I have one last fund that I promise I'll be short.
No, I just had some questions.
Let's do one last section, then we'll catch anything we didn't already get.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
The last area is, excuse me, Fund 5800, affordable housing. It is in this area that you see the capacity building program, and you see a lot of the workshops that we offer. A majority of the people that we have that contact us through this particular area are focused on the educational opportunities that are available, as well as activities that the capacity building folks get involved in. We also monitor and pull together the pilot agreements under this division. We actively market and provide outreach for those individuals that are eligible for rebate or refund of their property taxes at both the state, the local, and the county level. And then again, all of the workshops, which range from first-time homebuyers program, credit management, and a very popular financial management seminar. And then the tenant opportunity to purchase, where the properties are being sold by the owner and the tenants have an opportunity to acquire them. And those activities generally range from both the landlords that are getting in contact with us, and we're walking them through the process, as well as walking the tenants through their options under that ordinance.
Is there anything worth saying at this point in time about progress or lack thereof with the Tenacity building? Any problems there, or is that moving smoothly? I don't need lots of details, just wondering.
They were asked to provide a variety of information, some of which was incorporated in their rental agreement with the county. They were given a specific deadline, and they did not meet the deadline, so we'll be contacting the county and asking them to reevaluate compliance with that agreement, which should generate some conversation.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Schultz, and then Councilmembers Arvinson and Wright.
I just first I want to just compliment you and your staff, because when you consider the size of the staff and the number of programs and services and budget money sources that have to be managed and kept control, it's incredible to me. I'm impressed that so much can get done by the group of people that you have in this department. Getting back to what I was talking about before, I do think that in some way or another we have a responsibility here to try to inform homeowners about the benefits of code enforcement. Some concern, and I don't know what the vehicle is, and I'm not proposing anything for reconciliation at this point in time. But I just, right now, I get the impression that sometimes some property owners, homeowners, seem to think that the code enforcement staff is the enemy, rather than understanding that what the true story is.
One of the things that we are kicking around at the staff level is doing post-purchase workshops, which would include part of that. Also, hopefully head off. Right now we do a lot of foreclosure intervention, but generally by the time it gets to that point, it's too late. So we've been trying to identify different ways we can address some of your concerns, as well as provide people with some of the resources they need before they get too far underwater as far as the finances or the condition of the property.
Okay. Well, maybe we should have that conversation. The other question that I wanted to ask is sort of a loaded question, and I apologize ahead of time. But given the workload that you have, is there any area within your all these programs and services that would be better administered either with additional resources? I mean, I realize that that's almost the answer to the question is self-evident, but it just seems that I know that the staff is overloaded, or as you mentioned, in the area of code enforcement, they're swamped, to use your word. But I think this is vital to certain services are obviously more critical than others. So I just would like you to kind of see if you can respond to that kind of question.
The reality is there is always, as many of you are probably in the same position, more things to do than there are hours in a day. If you were to ask my staff that question, the folks in the community development and planning area would say, yes, we need some additional staff, which if you look at it, they're down 2 people right now. Neither of them were full-time positions, but because of their skill sets, we were able to provide a wide range of programming, which right now the coordinator and the associate planner are responsible for doing in large part. So we've basically gone down from 4 people to 2 people in that area as far as planning. Another area, and I believe this is addressed somewhat in the non-departmental budget, are some of the arts programming. Because of the expectations regarding the programming with this particular space, it's eating up a fair amount of my time, so there are things that I have to do that I end up doing badly, or
At midnight?
at night. And I believe there's some funding in that for that. Because if you look in the 5400 thing, for example, we've gone from cultural events programming from we've gone from 24 last year to up to 50, and it's increasing dramatically as people's expectations are going on. So planning could use some help. The cultural program specifically related to this space or the galleries space would be helpful. Code enforcement, they are, because of some of the folks that are not as quick to respond to the courtesy notices or the violation complaints or who we have to take to court could also use additional help. When you run into projects like the Sycamore Avenue building, I mean, okay, so you back off and you develop requests for bids, you do all the marketing, you do all the contact with the neighborhood and people that are bidding on it. So there are a lot of things that just come up that take more time than you might expect.
Thank you. Councilmember Robinson.
Sarah, I love it when you talk about 5,400. It's really like, whoa. Line
What?
I love it when you talk about 5,400, line 5,400.
I know, yeah.
I like that budgetary line-based budgeting. Unfortunately, we don't have a line 5,400 in our materials, so maybe if you're going to talk about that, which I encourage.
I am sorry.
you'll put those
5,400 is the community development department.
I understand, and I'm happy to listen to numeric references to budget items, and I'm glad to look them up, but we don't have that in our materials, so maybe if you want to talk about line items like that next year, you'll put it in the budget material. So we
Actually,
can
5,400 is not a line item, it's a department.
departmental
Yes.
number. Okay, whatever. Line item's the wrong word, but numeric referencing to departments and sub-departments and so forth.
Yeah.
I think it's good. I think it's a good way for us to look at budgets, too, as it is for you. Okay?
I must apologize. When I tab my notebook, I just put the numbers of the funds, so that's what
Okay.
I'm seeing, which is why I'm saying that.
And the other way is that you made a number of references to funds, which sounds good, but I had a little trouble following also, that you're handling a number of funds, and that helps you organize the materials that you're working with, and I don't see the funds, at least it didn't jump out at me. I did see on the first page the divisions, and maybe that's...
Maybe she said, aren't you having fun?
Maybe we're talking about how much fun we're having.
I think, Sarah, you're referring to the Special Revenue Fund, which is that how you're...
They're all funds. Each of the individual divisions within the department has
Like
a
administration, code
special
enforcement.
fund number. There's also the special revenue funds that come from non-governmental or non-city resources. So that
Like
would
grants.
be grants.
Okay. Yeah, I got a little, you kind of lost me both on the numbers, the departmental numbers and the funds part, but just some feedback for you to help me understand next time. The other thing I want to talk about very briefly is that I continue to believe that accessory apartments are a good form of affordable housing. They make the homeowner, they put the homeowner in a position of having things more affordable because there's a second source of income or a source of income for them. And they're affordable oftentimes for the people who are renting because in many cases homeowners will offer a part of their home at below market because maybe it's not as snazzy as a typical landlord offered unit of rental. And I encourage my colleagues and you to think about how we can make that more a part of our housing mix. One example of a good outcome of having accessory apartments is that you don't have houses that are completely dedicated to rental, and therefore you don't have situations where the renters aren't being supervised. Whereas in an accessory apartment situation, there's an ownership supervision of the rental apartment right in the building. So I'm just making that point that I believe that accessory apartments are a good form of affordable housing. I know that at the county there's an entire division that's dedicated to granting licenses for affordable housing and for enforcing that code enforcement goes to all the affordable housing locations in our town at one point or another. I've had an accessory apartment in my home for 25 years, so I have an intimate intimate experience with that. And I just want to point out that I believe it's a very good form of affordable housing delivery.
Councilmember Wright.
Thank you. Well, a couple questions. One is around the tenant organizing for $20,000. I know in the past council has had questions about the outcomes of that or the value of that service performed. Do you have any concern? Would be the first question. The second question is, do we have any hard numbers on either ideally outcomes that organizing is producing, or at least kind of inputs, like number of meetings they're holding, number of resident contacts, all that sort of stuff?
We can give the council copies of their reports. They report out on a, I believe it's a quarterly basis. The outcomes may be hard to quantify because a lot of it is capacity building in terms of empowering the tenants to address concerns that have been identified by themselves. Frankly, it's a very good program, and it allows staff to, it expands sort of our resources as far as staff. Since March of last year, they've been involved at Hampshire Towers, which, if any of you are familiar with, has been a challenge since it was sold to its current property owner. And they've done a lot of organizing there. They've been very engaged in the whole monitoring of the rental agreement that they have with the county, and have been working hard with the tenants to resolve the whole issue of balcony credits and illegal fees and things like that. So they're sort of our shadow at the staff level at that particular property. They've also been very involved in Hillwood Manor, which is a fairly large property in Councilmember Schultz Ward, which is in the process right now of going through bankruptcy. And frankly, for the last 2 years, they've been over there, and we've been trying to organize the tenants to sort of do a large-scale COLTA complaint regarding the illegal rents that have been going on there. For a variety of reasons, the tenants have not wanted to organize, so we've been working with individual tenants, and I believe there have been 12, close to 12, that have gone through the whole process to have their rents replaced. Without the involvement of the capacity builder, we would not have a pro bono attorney that is working on behalf of the tenants through this whole bankruptcy process at Hillwood Manor. We also have a pro bono attorney that they're working with that they've identified and are helping to facilitate the process over at Hampshire Towers. They've been actively engaged at Aspen Court Properties for the last year in terms of organizing those folks to address concerns regarding lack of maintenance and then the transfer of the properties to the new owner, and then have done a lot with the folks at MHP as far as some of the new properties that they've been building. So some of that will be hard to quantify, but we'll be glad to share with you the narratives about what's been going on.
That'd be great. I mean, I've been a tenant organizer in the past. I'm a big fan, generally, of tenant community organizing. So I would be curious to see the outcomes, and if there are goals that we have for them, like tenant associations formed or things like that, how they're doing against those.
Excuse me, if I could just add that what she was talking about with Hampshire Towers is the tenacity that I was referring to in my earlier question.
Yeah. This question is related to clean and lean. So you cited that we're spending $13,500 in the budget. I know I asked a question about this last year, so you guys might be frustrated by it, or I might be frustrated because I don't really perceive the information to be flowing through. But my understanding is on clean and liens or demolitions, then a lien, the lien term of part of the clean, gets put onto the property. And then the property owner is responsible for paying that at some point. So I'm wondering, do we know, and obviously there can be big lag effects in that, right? But over time, you'd suspect that it would wash out. And I think we determined that there is some interest charge if it sits on. So my question is like, okay, we're talking about putting out $13,500 this year. Like, what's our revenue from the lien this year? What was it last year? What's projected to be next year?
With the rare exception, people either pay the bill or it gets placed on their property taxes and they pay it that way, or it goes to tax sale. It's included in your budget because I can't spend any money unless it's included in the budget. So there is an offset, and we can get you that number. Right now, I think I have 2 clean and liens totaling roughly $5,000 that have not yet been paid, but will undoubtedly go to be placed on their property tax bill in June. But most people pay it, kicking and screaming, but they do pay it. But again, it has to be in the budget, otherwise I can't spend it.
No, I get that, but it would also be nice to see, to understand what the revenue side is coming in, because in a way, we should be saying we want to do more clean and liens because we find it to be a useful tool to get people to clean up their properties. And if it in essence, pays for itself in a relatively short period of time, we shouldn't be as worried about, are we spending 13.5 on in this year's budget, if we also know that within the 12 months or the next 24 months, 13.5 or more is going to come in, right? So it's just because I know that there's a property in my ward that on Cedar that needed a clean and lean for, I don't know if it's been executed yet, for like since I've been on the council. And I think it's like either now been executed or close to being executed. And I think there might be other properties that would benefit from that. And if we don't pay for it, then it seems like a logical thing to do.
We can give you a report on the expenditures that have been incurred and the revenues that have come in.
Great.
And for that particular property, I think they're going to start the end of next week.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Which also brings me to 36 Philadelphia. And I bring this up, I know it's not a budget item, but I bring this up because it's been also an ongoing property that is in my ward, but Councilmember Robinson looks out his back window on every day, which is in abysmal shape and has been a problem property, and we can't seem to get resolved. And there's a funny thing where he transferred it to some entity we don't kind of know. And I get the sense that we've now said, oh, we don't know what to do. Like, there's no, to me, next step or timeline or anything like that. So maybe there is, but I'm not aware of it. So I just want to know, because to me, oh, we don't know what to do isn't the answer to the problem. So
this particular case is a county case. So the county is the one that's doing the enforcement and all the court actions. There is some question about the legitimacy of the sale of the property because there's been no evidence that the people that the entity, which is like a We Do Good Works, Inc. kind of thing, actually exists from the state of Maryland's perspective. There's no corporation or certificate of good standing. There is a bench warrant out for the person who sold it. So we're looking for him, and we will.
is that the property owner?
Well, if the
prior
prior property owner or the current property owner, depending upon the legality of the current ownership.
Okay. And my last question is, besides building sidewalks, what if you had additional money and someone said in your department you can spend it on public safety, broadly, a broad definition of public safety, what would you do with the money?
I would continue to do the Safe Routes to School program because that's been very effective and has been very well received and has engaged a lot of people in conversations about things that you wouldn't otherwise expect to get engaged as far as pedestrian safety and the whole going to school thing safely. If I could do speed camera funds for any projects, I would do some of the pre-development work that is required to apply for grant funds, particularly along New Hampshire Avenue, because right now we're kind of in a rock and a hard place because we don't have enough capacity to do the front-end work that we need to successfully apply for the funding, for a majority of the funding.
So what is a pre-development? Give me an example. What's a pre-development?
Survey, engineering work, and pre-design work, working with the community to identify different design features that are appropriate for the area, include perhaps some stormwater management, sidewalks, trees, things like that.
And there's grant money out there we could apply for and receive if we did that pre-work?
For certain parts of the community, yeah. If you recall, last year when we submitted a community legacy application in the fall, I believe, that was one of the projects that we had applied for funding for was the new East-West Highway corridor. And because of the time period, because of the way that grant and many other grants are written, you have to expend your funds down within a defined period of time. Community Legacy Program has narrowed it down to 2 years with half of the funding spent within 12 months. And because none of that design work and engineering work had been completed at the time we submitted the application, they felt, and rightly so, that we would be unable to turn the project around in a timely manner. So rather than having all this money committed out there that's not going anywhere and could be used for other projects, they elected not to fund that particular project because we didn't have all of our homework done, for a better phrase.
That's the Gateway project.
The Gateway project.
But that pre-development work might not qualify for public safety, but you are saying that perhaps we could spend dollars on public safety in other areas, which would free up general
I'm
fund.
just picking out projects that I would like to do. How it gets allocated, I'm not familiar enough with other departments' budgets.
Right. But are there any other, besides the Safe Routes to School, are there any other, what you would consider public safety specific projects or personnel that you would use in your department?
The only other area that we have that has any, that falls into a broad definition of public safety would be the Code Enforcement Division.
And one last question. What's the dollar amount that we would need if we were to put something in the reconciliation budget to do the pre-work that you suggested?
That is already included in the capital improvement budget, and I believe it's $80,000.
So we have it in the budget this year?
It's in the speed camera fund.
It's in the speed camera funds that was in the budget that was prepared by the city manager.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Snipper.
Thank you. Just a quick report back to Councilmember Wright. I have had a number of compliments on our tenant organizing from tenants in Ward 5. Great. I mean, they're just uniformly, I haven't heard a negative thing about the tenant organizers. It's one after another really positive stuff.
I mainly brought it up because I had heard not from myself but from other council members concerned about that, and I was kind of curious.
Okay. Any other questions for Housing and Community Development? Thank you.
Thank you.
We will take a short break, and we will come back for the next item, which is Speed Camera Fund. I was wondering whether the chief was going to lead it off or Barb was. Okay. And everybody should have the salmon sheets for this item as well. Everybody got those handy?
Speed camera fund.
We're ready when you are.
I think most of this is probably going to be more of a council discussion than probably a staff discussion. Before getting started, just wanted to note, draw to the council's attention as well, that there is a revised speed camera fund summary that was included in the original agenda packet, the one with the blue cover. After we developed the proposed budget, there was an additional invoice that came in for some work under the capital outlay section. So the initial year-end fund balance was, I think, about $70,000 more than what is before you this evening. So I just wanted to call that to your attention. There was also a supplemental information sheet that was left at your places at the dais, the infamous salmon sheet. Thought it might be helpful, as you all sort of talked about the speed camera fund, maybe to provide a little bit more detail and to put it all in kind of one space, one spot that you could sort of just eyeball what is included in my recommended budget. So this is actually a fairly detailed listing of everything that is in the proposed budget that you all are considering this evening. As you can see, there are a certain number of employees that are charged to the speed camera fund. We have talked about this before, but there is an increased FTE count in this fund. The grant funding for the police officer who was assigned to the gang task force, by all accounts, is likely to run out as of the first quarter of FY12. As proposed, 75% of the cost of that police officer would be moved to the speed camera fund for FY12. So there are a total, as proposed, of 3.75 FTEs that are accounted for in the speed camera fund. There is a required contractual payment. We do contract with a vendor, ACS, State and Local Solutions, for our speed camera program. Under the terms of that contract, I'm going to look to the chief if I get this wrong, the vendor gets $16.25 of every $40 citation. And I guess about a year or so ago, we did switch from having the county do ticket processing for us and actually having the vendor, mainly because it was much more cost effective to have the vendor actually do some of the processing of the tickets for us. There are a number of what we term safety projects proposed in the FY12 budget for the speed camera fund. Those total just under $141,000. And as noted on the additional information this evening, it is in-car video cameras, personal protective equipment for police officers, and field radio equipment and mobile computers. As I had mentioned, both in the transmittal message and my budget presentation of a couple weeks ago, field radio equipment and mobile computers had previously been funded out of the equipment replacement reserve, and those have been moved to the speed camera fund. As the chief talked about during his budget presentation, we will be undergoing a fairly significant conversion of our radio system to be compatible with Montgomery County's system. And in the capital improvement program tab of your binder, you will see that we're kind of going into it very incrementally, at least for FY12 and FY13, and then we have over a $400,000 expenditure coming up in FY14 associated with those radios. Capital expenditures, as I had mentioned when I presented my budget, given all the different feelings on the part of the council about the use of speed camera funds, I took an approach of trying to probably put a little bit of something in for everyone, and you all can be the judge of whether that was successful or not. There is $575,000 included in my recommended budget for new sidewalk design and construction. Just based on the council discussion to date, staff's assumption is that most of that work would take place in Ward 6 and 2. If you look under footnote 4, provided a little bit more detail of how that $575,000 was arrived at. There were a number of sidewalks in Ward 6 that have been the subject of community meetings, as Councilmember Schultz alluded to under council comments. The assumption has been that those would likely go forward in FY12. And Darrell has talked to our design folks, and these are fairly good construction estimates for those sidewalk segments in Ward 6. We have not had that type of detailed discussion regarding sidewalks in Ward 2. I think Councilmember Clay and her constituents will probably continue to have discussions about what streets should go forward and what streets shouldn't. So there was a balance, sort of a plug figure, if you will, of almost $272,000 assumed for sidewalk design and construction in Ward 2. $300,000 was included for ADA retrofit sidewalk project work. I would note that this number is probably lower than I know the Public Works Director would like to see, but once again was trying to stay balanced, doing retrofits to existing sidewalks as well as constructing new sidewalks. I know there has been a suggestion that the council may wish to decrease the overall sidewalk budget, and I would encourage the council, if you're inclined to do that, to please keep that $300,000 in their budget for FY12 for ADA sidewalk retrofit work. Not only is it a legal compliance issue, that we should be making progress towards making our sidewalks accessible, but I think this is a community that has always prided itself on being inclusive, and certainly that should include our residents who have disabilities and struggle with accessibility issues. There's $130,000 for the Ritchie Avenue traffic calming project. That project was under design this fiscal year. $30,000 for other traffic calming projects yet to be identified, though there has been, I think, a petition or at least interest expressed by Ward 5 residents regarding some traffic calming measures.
Is that the Hilltop?
Yes, that's the Hilltop, though I think that will be considerably less than $30,000 based on what has been discussed to date. This would probably also be the line item where we would put in raised crosswalks, speed hump installations, or anything of that nature that may come forward in FY12 that we're not aware of at this time. The pre-development work that Sarah talked about relative to Ethan Allen Gateway, that's $80,000 for that pre-development work. And then $20,000 for possible streetlight upgrades. I know there's been some question about whether that funding should remain in or not. This was previously funded out of the general fund. We do have one neighborhood, I believe, that has requested additional street lighting, and that would be in Ward 3. I believe, Darrell, it's on Allegheny. Is that correct? So in summary, my proposed budget assumed $2.28 million worth of speed camera fund expenditures. One of the things, going back to the speed camera fund summary that was in your blue packet, is we are expecting to end FY12 based on these figures I just talked about with a fund balance of about $310,000. As I indicated in the transmittal message and again in the agenda materials for this evening, I do encourage the council to keep in mind that we need to fund that radio conversion going forward, and my suggestion would be that $310,000 be earmarked for that radio conversion. That will not be enough to pay for it. So when we have the 2 new speed cameras come online, well, the one I guess is online for about 30 days on University, and then the east-west highway camera, that the first priority for the net revenues from those 2 new cameras should be to build up that fund balance and to set aside the money for the radio acquisition going forward in 13 and 14.
And can you just say anything in terms of the proposed speed camera on east-west, whether that, I know that there have been some hiccups with that. Is it anticipated that it will go in, or is it anticipated that it, okay.
It's anticipated will go in. The chief had a successful conversation with the property owner regarding the possible easement. We will be sending over a legal services request form to the city attorney's office tomorrow and asking them to prepare a draft agreement that the chief can share with the property owner. So at least every indication right now is that camera will go online probably around July 1st if everything keeps moving forward. I think that's really all I wanted to say. Certainly, staff would be happy to answer any questions, but obviously there is a fairly broad definition in the law in terms of public safety. Based on the council comments I had heard today, tried to balance those competing interests among council members. I think the staff is looking for your direction. Just did want to just highlight once again that the revenues in the proposed budget are based on the 4 existing cameras. Obviously, we have virtually no data, and I had no data at the time when the budget went out to you for the university camera, and certainly we have no data for a camera that has yet to be installed. My recommendation to the council is that you kind of talk through the issues based on the proposed revenue figure and plan to maybe revisit the speed camera fund maybe more or less around the first of the year. The cameras should have been in place for a number of months, and the goal of the program is obviously to have citations fall off because people are being more compliant with their speeds. But I would think by January 1st we should have a good sense of what the cameras are producing, and should revisit the fund at that time and do a budget modification and also get a sense of how the council wants to allocate those funds.
Okay. Thank you. I'll just start off with a general observation and 2 clarifications to what you had. The general observation is I anticipate that there will be a fair amount of discussion about the speed camera fund, and to the extent possible, if we can kind of keep the reconciliation pieces for the reconciliation discussion and get whatever information we need in this discussion, I know it may bleed a little bit, but if I can ask my colleagues to just kind of keep that in mind as we're talking about this. And if the city manager could remind me, was the ADA portion of the cost, the anticipated cost for ADA compliance for the whole package, was that like 4.5 million?
I believe that's correct. I'm looking to the Public Works Director. Is that
Okay.
accurate, Daryl? Yes.
So if we did 300,000 a year, we would anticipate that there would be about 15 years to get through the list. Okay. I just wanted to clarify that when you were talking about the money for the police radios, I don't remember what language you used, but it was something like compliance with, or compatibility with the Montgomery County radios, and I just wanted to make sure that everybody understands that that's continue to be compliant and
That's correct.
with
I'm
those
sorry.
radios. We are now, and everybody's marching forward, and we need to do that to stay in step with all of that.
That's correct. The one thing I did just want to mention, Daryl and I talked about it earlier, so Mayor, I'm glad you brought this up, is the roughly $4 million figure is based on sidewalks, and Daryl, please correct me if I'm wrong, that are actually along non-state highway roads. One of the things Daryl and I talked about earlier and wanted to mention this evening is, everyone I think knows that the state constructs sidewalks but really doesn't maintain them. So certainly there are a number of compliance issues on sidewalks along state highways. So at some point, not necessarily this evening, it would probably be helpful for us to have a discussion about how the council wishes to address compliance issues on those sidewalks.
Because those were not included in the sidewalk study.
That is
Who
correct.
has the legal obligation to make sure they're ADA compliant?
Well, none of us are lawyers, but Daryl probably can
Yeah, I
speak to
don't know
this
if we've
than I
ever
do.
had a legal reading on that. State Highways, at least their last couple of years, has been vocal about they don't do maintenance. So their maintenance ends at the curb, and
Right, but
they,
this isn't maintenance, it's compliance.
right.
Yeah, it might be helpful to get some legal guidance on this issue.
Yeah, I think so. And my sense, just looking at what the state has been doing recently with the sidewalks, my sense was that their read on their compliance on their sidewalks was to go ahead and fix the ramps and cuts, but probably not to deal with offsets and slopes.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So if we make that legal request, it should be probably acknowledging that they've done that, but what about the rest? Councilmember Clay.
Can you tell me what the estimated cost is for the radios? What are we talking about? Because it says all the way fiscal year 2013 through 2016.
Yeah, it's under the capital section, but I can mention it very briefly, Councilmember Clay. We actually spread it out over 3 years. There's $49,000 in the FY12 budget, $49,000 in the FY13 budget, and then the bulk of it would happen in FY14, and it's $407,000 in that year.
Okay, so it's like $500,000.
Right, it's about $500,000.
But we're thinking we're going to have $300,000 this year, which gets us more than halfway there.
Right,
And we're not going to purchase those for another couple of years.
right.
Okay. Regarding the state, I sent everyone, maybe just a few weeks ago, the email with the news story that talked about how the state got sued by the family, I think of a woman and her unborn child that got killed. They were along a state highway where there was no sidewalk and no guardrail. And the state was found liable, I think it was to the tune of $3 million for those deaths, and the lack of a sidewalk was cited in there, which, is a couple things. It's like, what? There's this idea that the ADA doesn't require you to build sidewalks, but then, you have this lawsuit. And also that after my conversation on Monday night with the Public Works Director, talking about who actually owns the right-of-way, I'm accustomed to the idea of the right-of-way being an easement and the property owner owning it. So I went and I paced off my own house, which is, my lot is 65 by 85, and I'll be damned if I didn't come up about 10 feet short of the curb. So I would think, in response to what Councilmember Wright said, that given the fact that the state owns the land under the right-of-way, that they would be liable for the compliance issues. I don't know how the city could be held liable for that. And by the same token, quite frankly, I don't know how residents could be held liable for not shoveling their sidewalks when they apparently don't own the land underneath of them. So I thought that,
I think that one's because our code says so.
I don't know how you can create a code that tells somebody that they're responsible for something that happens on land that isn't owned by them. So, I mean, we can create all kinds of laws, but that doesn't mean that they're...
That one, I mean, I don't know the case you talked about, but the case of people slipping and falling on sidewalks and property owners getting sued because they didn't clear the sidewalk based on city code, there's probably thousands of those cases. Right. I don't know what the case law is, but I think it's pretty clear that cities can require that of property owners, even if it's in the public right-of-way, and they're responsible.
Right, but my point would be that if they didn't own the property, they wouldn't be the property owner. How can you make a law to require somebody to do something that's on an adjacent property or some other property that the city owns? By that logic, why can't the city sue me when somebody slips and falls on the sidewalk in front of the community center? It's not my property, but
we also require that people maintain the right-of-way in front of their house, but we don't let them decide what trees get planted there.
Right.
So
I find that fascinating. I find it fascinating that the city or the state could hold somebody liable for something that happens on property that they don't actually own. That's a fascinating concept to me. The other question that I wanted to ask was about using public safety dollars from the speed camera for doing things like gang prevention or intervention programs or youth engagement programs that are related to those public safety issues. And I know you sent something out on the
I did pose that question to the city attorney's office. Obviously, there was kind of a broader legal opinion, but the question that I posed had to do with more kind of for lack of a better way of putting it, a general sort of job training type of program, and whether, in her opinion, that would meet the definition of public safety, and kind of an extension of that if it was more geared towards youth who had been through the criminal justice system, so it was probably more of an intervention. Her response, and I'll just read this to you. I think it is a matter of judgment and documentation. It would be best if the program was aimed at those with juvenile records or who are at risk of involvement in the criminal justice system. It would require some factual support by the chief/police department, which shows the nexus between the program and law enforcement goals. There's no law on this. One needs to have reasonable administrative findings that there is a connection to law enforcement. The chief and I did talk about this, and he can certainly address this himself. I would say from a staff perspective, the nexus in terms of public safety is probably not as clear as it may be on traffic calming, things of that nature, charging a police officer, a gang officer. Obviously there are people who sort of watch how speed camera funds are used. I would say if the council has interest in those type of programs, it might be cleaner to take some other more clearly defined public safety expenditure from the police department budget, move that to the speed camera fund, which would obviously open up other funding for other types of programs. I think that I wouldn't want to be the test case on something where it's not as clearly defined, perhaps as some other things that are clearly public safety related. I mean, that's, I don't know, Chief, do you have any comments? Okay. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. Thank you very much. Last comment I wanted to make is that I see the sidewalk money for Ward 2, which is great. And as you know, we've had some folks in Forest Park along Prince George's Avenue who are really interested in having there's a small section where there's sidewalk, no sidewalk, and then it picks up again, which actually should come up on the ADA compliance issues, because once you've got a section of sidewalk and you have a gap, that should come up. And I think that we got 100% or close to 100% of those residents who came and asked us to install that sidewalk. And we've had some renewed interest in the Long Branch Sligo neighborhood around some of the traffic calming pieces that came up about 3 years ago. And it seems like there might be some renewed interest in revisiting that, as well as, possibly some interest in a sidewalk, some other sidewalks in Long Branch Sligo. There's also interest relative to being able to do some fixes to the intersection at Carroll Avenue and Flower Avenue, which we might do in concert with the Green Street activities that happen. And I know they're not part of the SHA designated side, but since we'll be sort of flowing everything into that intersection, that's something to keep in mind. And other than that, the sidewalk conversation in Ward 2 is just beginning in May. I know in Ward 6 you guys started with a 30% design, but in Ward 2 we're going to start with a process conversation and collecting information and input from people rather than sort of leaping right into here's the design we've picked for you kind of a mode. So just wanted to share that.
Other questions, comments? Councilmember Wright.
So I just wanted to touch on the ADA item again. My understanding is that you ideally would have to have a plan put together. And I would think, I know we have a report from the, what was the name? Not the
Tool Design Grade.
Tool Design. That sort of says, I guess ideally what we would need to do to be compliant as totally based on the law. But I thought the plan includes like a time frame under which you're going to do it, specifics of what you would be doing, as well as there's a measure of like reasonableness to achieve the standard, right? And it sounded like we have a little bit of, when I talked to Daryl in the past, a little bit of leeway in determining what's kind of reasonable and what our plan is. So if it says like there can't be, grade estimate, it's not 0%, but 2% or whatever, we can have reasonable rules for trying to get close to that, but not. And those seem, I wouldn't say arbitrary, but it seems like there's a judgment there. And so it seems to me before we know exactly what it's going to cost, the $4.1 million, it would actually behoove us to have a set of standards around, and maybe we've already developed those standards, and if they're in writing, and then mapped out on a plan towards that. And then it's, is it going to take us 15 years to get exactly there? And if we're prioritizing the most egregious situations, it seems like we'd be making a lot more progress than other places and can be deemed to be making a reasonable effort. So does that mean we need to spend $300,000 a year? I'm not sure. So it just feels like I haven't seen like a written plan about exactly what we would do, and it seems like that would be important to have to make the case that we have a plan and we're moving forward, as opposed to we have the study, this is what we're kind of verbally are thinking about. So
No, I think you're correct, and I think we may have touched on this a while back. What you're referring to as a transition plan, and that is something staff is working on. Both Susie and Daryl and I have talked about that. I know Suzanne has done some outreach with folks in the community who do have a disability of some type or another, because that is part of the process, is to get input from people who would actually be impacted or dealing with disabilities. I don't know if we have an exact time frame, but I think our hope is to try to have something to you in the near future. But I do agree with you, Councilmember Wright, having some type of documented plan. Fiscal constraints are certainly recognized in the law. I think the most important thing is to get the transition plan together, as you suggested, and for the city to commit to some type of funding level that's reasonable. Suzanne, is there anything you wanted to add? Suzanne is our ADA coordinator, I think, as many of you know.
That's true, and I have been pulling together kind of a little group
The concept is to go out and look through the plan, shows where the kind of the technical problems are with the existing sidewalks, and see where the priority areas are. What are the kinds of things that cause the most problem for people, or the locations that are of most interest to them. I will say that we need to move it quickly because not having one is part of our ADA requirements. The other aspect I just want to mention is that, as you can kind of tell even by the budget documents, $300,000 doesn't buy a whole lot of sidewalk improvements. So it's a relatively small proportion for infrastructure correction. Whether or not that's the right amount for this coming year, we'll need to look at through this planning process.
The other thing I would just add, and I think Councilmember Clay had brought this up maybe a month or more ago, and I think we actually, in the cover sheet, kind of cited the provision she was talking about, which is the law does give high priority to certain locations, specifically government offices and facilities, transportation, including bus stops, places of public accommodation. So there is some general guidance in the law in terms of those facilities or areas that should have priority. And then I think, as Suzanne indicated, working with some folks in the community, which are deemed to be the most problematic. So that is something that we're going to need to just kind of work through, and putting together the draft transition plan that certainly will be before the council. Ultimately, it's your plan.
And I just want to add 2 points on that. I think to the extent that we can have clarity on what our obligations might or might not be on the sidewalks on state highways as we put together that plan, it would be very helpful to have. And I can anticipate scenarios under which we might need to work hand in hand with MML to get a better understanding of that. So if we need, depending on what the answers are in terms of the legal research, and if we're going to do that, it might be helpful to know that before we go to the convention in June, so that if there is some coordination needed, it might be a lot easier to happen that way. And the other thing that I just wondered if it needs to be part of that plan. I had a resident come in during my office hours yesterday with a lot of pictures and questions about sidewalk access, and some of them concerned mulch piles that had been, dumped onto the sidewalk and were blocking all but like a foot of the public sidewalk, and that had been there more than a week. And so I didn't know if there are ADA requirements to kind of, even once you get an ADA compliant sidewalk, to have access on that sidewalk. And I don't know who put the mulch there, whether it was the city or a private contractor, but if it was the city, are we kind of shooting ourselves in the foot if we do that? So there might be some kind of maintenance of the installations that we need to look at.
Right. Well, certainly, even when the Tool Design Group did its study, it documented numerous places where kind of a movable object or pile was on the sidewalk, making it a violation of the ADA standards. What's in the program are those that are kind of not movable components of the sidewalk.
Right, but I'm just thinking in terms of putting together the plan, if we have to address those movable pieces. Right. And it might require some
there's a lot of education. Well, maybe city code, but there's also just a lot of education that's required. Mm-hmm. I think people, sometimes park their car on the sidewalk because they're trying to do something or whatever. It's remarkable how difficult it is to manage when there's those kind of situations. So it's a good thing to look at.
And potentially basketball hoops. Okay.
Just wanted to add one little piece to that. We do have, when we first started the ADA work, we worked with the Whitman, Reichert and Associates to develop a standard for what we were going to use for our design standards and our construction standards. So we do have that on the web. We borrowed heavily from state highways documents. They've already, no need to reinvent the wheel. They established the criteria. We did make adjustments in the areas where we thought it was reasonable, and we've identified those. So we do have our programmatic policy specific to sidewalks about what we're looking to do. So that's been spelled out. And then the formal process, actually, as we proceed, is we have to give ourselves a waiver any time we vary from the from our compliance guidelines. So then you would have a documented thing in a file that says, we couldn't move the utility pole because of X, Y, Z, so here's what we did instead, and, we give ourselves permission to do that. So anytime we can't meet the standard, the technical requirement is that we would develop a paper trail that explains what the logic was, what the reason was, and then how we tried to make accommodations come as close as we could.
So 2 other comments about this. One, having seen how that plays out, I guess, in North Tacoma, I know there's many things that you would see that you wouldn't think of as security issues, safety issues, like not having a rumple strip at the sidewalk, at the edge of the ramp or things like that. But there's a lot of work that I think is just marginally, really, again, I've said this in the past, drives like very, very marginal improvement for the cost. And I think most of it has to do with probably like slight changes in cross grade. And then the second thing, I think it might behoove us also, this might be a place where we might want to get some outside expertise around the plan from someone who's a
We've been in contact with the Department of Justice. We're working with the folks who, and getting direction from the folks who, oversees this element.
Okay, great. So I just want to understand the radio issue a little bit more. I know we have a big number that's coming up in FY14. I remember before in the law there was like some rule about how much you could accumulate of the funds. That's gone away. Right now it's just the total percentage of it as a portion of your budget.
Yeah, there's actually, I think there's a couple pieces you're referring to, because this was also part of the 2009 change.
Yeah.
The original law, and the Chief and I were just talking about this yesterday, actually had a provision that if you carried over funds from one fiscal year to another, there were some consequences to doing that potentially. That provision actually got struck in the 2009 amendment. What is left there, and Yvonne and I are doing some quick calculations today, especially as we have new cameras come on, is that if your net revenues from speed cameras, and what it means by net is you can net out staff that's involved in program administration, and we have one police officer and one civilian. You can net out the cost of the contractual payment to the vendor and bank fees, things of that nature. So you take your speed camera revenues in a particular fiscal year, you net out those program administration costs, and then you take what remains divided by the city's overall revenues that year. If that exceeds 10%, that funding must be, that excess above 10% must be remitted to the State Comptroller's Office. So that it's interesting. When that provision came in, I had a lot of discussions with MML and other people. There's no uniform reporting. There's no form. There's basically just a provision in the law that says you're sort of obligated to do the calculation, and you send the check to this person, and what the State Comptroller has to do with it. I think we have quite a long way to go before we would ever hit that 10% threshold. The things that obviously come into play is, if we were to have, for some reason, no grant funding whatsoever, so, your special revenue fund revenue just drops off completely. If the base were to fall considerably for some obscure reason like that, that could certainly impact it, but I think that's the current state of the law.
Okay. It just seems, I'm a little bit concerned. I get the idea that we want to have money available for the radios. I just get a little bit concerned if we have new cameras online that we're not budgeting for. I think that's kind of right, because we don't quite know what they're going to be. But they're going to be something, and then there's going to be a couple years until we actually have to pay the money. And particularly if that's at if we set aside that money at the expense of other things that we might want to do, either public safety related or where we might want to use that to pay for something public safety, and then I would not be a proponent of that.
It's I appreciate the concern. Kind of rightly or wrongly, what I have set up is almost sort of a equipment replacement reserve within the speed camera fund. I mean, that's the practical effect of this. Certainly the council could choose to move these items back if you desire to the equipment replacement reserve. I have prepared some information on the reserve that'll go out in the packet for Monday. Ultimately it becomes a funding issue in one place or the other. The amount that, based on all the current projections, once again, as Councilmember Wright indicated, not including the new cameras, that you would need to come up with to fully fund the radio installation and the other capital items for the police that are included in speed camera would be an additional $218,000. Certainly, you're not obligated to do that all in FY12 off the new cameras. That would be my conservative financial approach, to say book that money first to make sure you have it in hand to pay for those expenditures, but that's ultimately a council decision, how you choose to fund it and the timing in which you fund it.
So it's either book it first or it's keep it in mind, don't lose sight of it, it's got to be there, do something in the meantime.
Yes, I would say if you don't elect to book the entire $218,000 additional that you would need, I would keep in mind that you have a $407,000 plus expenditure in FY14, and at a minimum you should be planning to book, just as we try to do with the equipment replacement reserve, a good third or more of that, because that's 2014 is going to be upon you very quickly, and the police department would be out of business if they did not have their radios, to be in compliance or in conformance with Montgomery County. My guess would be, and I wish we could give you a better idea of what the cameras would generate. Obviously, the hope is that the high rate of violations that showed up in the testing phase, that people will slow down. That has not happened to be really the case on New Hampshire Avenue. I think it is a different kind of different travel patterns on east-west, probably coming in that direction than it is going down New Hampshire, which is obviously for people who are out of town, a major way that they get into the district. Do I think that you will probably net more than $218,000 off the two new cameras during the fiscal year? Yes, I do. Can I give you a number of what that would be? No, I can't.
And I don't want to get away from this too much, but can you just say anything at this point about as we pull capital items from the equipment replacement reserve and put them in the speed camera fund, how that is helping the equipment replacement reserve, or what shape that's in, or whether there's going to be further need or desire to pull more of that in the future, or whether pulling a couple things now kind of satisfies that?
I have information already together. Yvonne's already reviewed it, so it's good to go, and I can certainly get that out to you tomorrow. At this point in time, and this is after taking out the radio conversion and the mobile computers, and moving some items to the proposed creation of the facility reserve, there is, through 2039, I believe it is, we have identified $17 million worth of needs, future capital replacement needs in the equipment replacement reserve. We have about just a little over, I think, projected $2 million that will be in, Yvonne, correct me if I'm wrong, that will be in the reserve at the end of fiscal 2012, assuming that the council does go forward with the recommendation to contribute $750,000. Is that correct, Yolanda?
It's $2.15 million.
So, what was the total figure?
$17 million. Now, obviously, that's going through 2039.
Right. So that's at this point in time identified approximately $15 million worth of funding that'll have to get in there in the out years.
Right. I mean, I think certainly the having the availability, at least the option of using speed camera funds to pay for the radio conversion, it is a big help in terms of kind of shoring up the equipment replacement reserve. There's certainly a variety of things, as you all have talked about, that could be moved to the speed camera fund, and I think it becomes a matter of priority. If I were to look at, the next, probably a very large item, in the police department equipment realm would certainly be the annual car allotment. And if you look at the capital outlay, it's a couple $100,000 a year. That would be a valid use of speed camera money if the council chose to do that. So I really think this is probably more than almost any part of the budget. Certainly it's all a matter of priority for the council, but I think this is an area where I think there's a lot of different thoughts, and I think the staff is just looking for the council's direction as to what you would want to do with the speed camera funds.
Thanks. Councilmember Schultz.
I want to get back to what Councilmember Wright, some of the questions that Councilmember Wright was asking with regard to the use of the speed camera fund relative to sidewalks and ADA. Because you say, and you've quoted this yourself, the plan should give higher priority to connections to government offices, bus stops, places of accommodation. And then in another place at the bottom of this page, this salmon item you passed out, so far approximately 170 communities have been cited by the Justice Department under Project Civic Access, ranging from towns smaller than Tacoma Park to large jurisdictions. And so, for the benefit of the audience, basically this is saying that the Justice Department is proactive. They aren't waiting for somebody to complain. And if a municipality isn't making progress, quote unquote, and is defined by the Justice Department, they're going to be subject to troubles.
That's correct. I mean, I think the initial push with, in my experience with the Americans with Disability Act, going back to obviously to the early 1990s when it went into effect, I think the initial push was on the employment realm and those kind of accommodations. I think in recent years, it has moved to the infrastructure realm. I think what I had shared with the council a couple months ago was Fairfax County actually came under a consent order through the Project Civic Access program. Shortly after I gave that information to the council, the city of Des Moines also came under a consent order. So it is an area where I think the Department of Justice is being proactive, and I think part of the reason for that, a sad commentary, I believe, but I think generally in society, things that people would not do based on ethnicity, gender, religion, things like that, I don't know that there's perhaps the same sensitivity generally in terms of dealing with issues of disability and access. And I think that's why the Department of Justice, in my opinion, has been so proactive on this front.
I understand all that, and I guess I just don't want our city to find itself under a consent order, because then that might remove an awful lot of the flexibility that we think we have with regard to the speed camera fund. We might find that we have little, if any, flexibility under it. And so it just raises to my mind whether or not the $300,000 that we've tentatively earmarked as a baseline for ADA work on an annualized basis is in fact a reasonable amount. And I know you can't say that it is or it isn't because you don't know, and I don't gather. Suzanne, they haven't enlightened us from on high as to how they take that thing into account.
No, I think that the important part is that we do develop a transition plan, that we show substantial movement towards accomplishing that transition plan. And as the city manager mentioned, there are some areas about connections that don't have to be where there's existing sidewalks. I mean, to public buildings, if there's not a sidewalk, you need to put a sidewalk there. So there's some things where it's not just correcting a slope problem or some other kind of problem. Whether or not $300,000 a year is sufficient, we will not know, because we need to figure out that transition plan and come up with what makes sense. I think the city manager has put that in as a good faith effort to work in the coming year while we look at that transition, prepare and look at the transition plan.
Right. And I would just, if I may, I would just add too, I mean, I think, and certainly I think Councilmember Wright, when he made this comment, is correct. The staff, I think, has and needs to make a very high priority getting the transition plan done. I think working in the city's favor, and Darrell, please correct me if I'm wrong, is I think we have spent close to $1 million, is that correct, on ADA retrofit. So I think as we work towards getting that transition plan done in a very short period of time, that would certainly work in the city's favor, that we, even without a plan, we've taken the issue seriously and we have spent a considerable amount of money. So I think the trick is just to get the plan in place.
But what Ms. Ludlow just said leads me to the next point, is that it has been said in this room in past months is that, the ADA only applies to existing or retrofitting or correcting existing sidewalks, but in fact, that could
That's
be a
not
little
correct.
misleading.
Right, that's primarily the case.
Mhm.
Certainly, if you have an existing sidewalk and it doesn't
Right.
meet the standards, it's obvious and you can see that. The determination, though, certainly public buildings are called out, public transportation is called out as locations that need connections, and sometimes that means putting in a sidewalk where there isn't one.
And as an example, what we're planning to do in Ward 6 on some of those streets, like Holton Lane, between Wildwood and New Hampshire, those are sidewalks that will connect to bus stops, which we could then say, this is part of our ADA plan. It's not just there solely for the benefit of the whatever, but it's these other benefits as well, where we're connecting people, enabling them to getting to bus stops and to the commercial areas. I don't know whether commercial areas represent public accommodations, but
Part of that really does come out of the transition plan. If there are priorities in the community in terms of destinations, that's something that would come through.
And furthermore, on Wildwood Drive, where there's numerous school buses that transit that street every day, there are literally mobs of kids, and there are no sidewalks to speak of on Wildwood Drive. So I think not only are we helping the disabled to be able to get around, but we're doing something in the ADA area with regard to kids having a safe route to schools. So, I mean, I'm just making a point here is all I'm trying to say. I'm not really asking a question other than I want us to be sure that this as best we can, that this 300,000 or whatever number we come up with is going to forestall the Department of Justice.
And Councilmember Schultz, if I can just add one other thought based on your point. As I talked with colleagues in Fairfax County about their experience with their compliance order, they were telling me things that led me to believe that they were having to address projections on walls in the building, including things like art installations, where somebody who was blind and walking with a cane would be walking along and not feel it because it's not at the floor and they hit something that's coming out from the wall. Those had to go. And I can imagine things like possible ADA compliance issues with a bathroom at Hefner Park, or those types of things that when you get into a compliance situation, all of that stuff goes in.
They do look at the whole game.
Councilmember Robinson.
As regards to the radios, how are we doing in communicating with Prince George's County, Chief?
When we get the new radio system, we'll be able to communicate. That's why we've budgeted so much for the next 2 years to our supervisors, because their radios will be up before ours in Montgomery County. We'll be able to communicate with PG with the radios we're going to buy this year and the next year. We'll have our corporals and sergeants, our supervisors, so they can communicate. When the whole system's bought in the final year, we will be able to talk to both PG County and DC, which is what we can't do now.
Right. Thank you very much. I have a couple things to say about this, the sidewalks and so forth. A couple questions. Did the tool design study or the tool study have the priorities to government offices and facilities, transportation, public accommodation, as part of the
There's a
classification.
definition of pedestrian generators, which would have been pedestrian generators, like bus stops, like schools, like
Okay.
public buildings.
Okay, so we can use that study to help us in developing our transition plan. I don't want to cross the Department of Justice. Nobody wants to cross the Department of Justice. That's very clear here. On the other hand, if they tell us you all have to have such and such an infrastructural improvement, and then don't provide any funding for it, that sounds something like what would be called an unfunded mandate, it sounds like to me. Am I right on that? I mean, that's kind of the general...
To the extent that your definition is correct, yes, and they don't care.
They don't care. We have to spend the money. They're not giving it to us. They're forcing us to do something.
Comply with the law.
Sounds like a whole lot like an unfunded mandate to me. And we spend on maintenance of our roads. Do we spend or we have earmarked $500,000 every year? Is that right?
400 for the FY12 and then up to 500 after that.
Okay. And is that 400 or 500 for maintenance of all our roads?
I'm not sure I'm understanding the
Well, if we're
question.
earmarking that amount, that covers upkeep for all our roads? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the amount that we assumed we would need in order to have a 20-year life cycle on our
Okay.
roads.
So we're assuming we can keep our roads current and solid for $400,000 a year. Okay. And I don't know what and this year we've gotten our budget for sidewalks, the $300,000 for retrofit for ADA, and then 600. Oops, where did it go? 575 for new sidewalks. So we're thinking of spending $875 for sidewalks and $400 for roadway, for maintenance of our roadways. So I'm just trying to put this in context. We're anticipating spending more than twice as much for sidewalks as we are for all of our roadways.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that would be accurate.
That's
One of the
accurate.
things to keep in mind, obviously, when, as far as doing any kind of sidewalk construction, is there's design work associated with that, which typically, when you're paving a road, there's not the same degree of design work. And Darrell, I can't really speak to the inspection level if one is higher than the other, but they both have inspection services. My guess would be that for sidewalks, it might be at a higher level.
And, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not a lover of roads over sidewalks. I'm just trying to put things in context as far as what we're putting in our budget to maintain the two methods of travel, of foot and bike and road, or bike and car. And I take your point, City Manager Matthews, about how ADA in the initial stages were designed to force or encourage the private sector to comply with ADA requirements. And I understand that your comment leads me to believe that now the shift is from the private sector to the public sector. In other words, private companies were asked, maybe forcefully, to comply with ADA requirements, and now it's the cities and counties, local entities, which are being asked rather forcefully to comply with ADA requirements as defined by Department of Justice.
I would say that the initial focus was on the employment realm, and they were equally vigilant about how they assessed both public and private employers. I think it was more, at least in my experience, the initial focus was more on ensuring non-discrimination in employment matters, and they were equal opportunity in that, and it didn't matter whether you were a public employer or a private employer.
Got it. Well, when we develop, here are my suggestions and hopes when we develop our transition plan, which seems to be the next thing that we're intending to do in order to ensure that we're complying with the Department of Justice. First of all, I think we should go to more places than just the Department of Justice to find the guidelines with which we ought to cast our plan. If we just go to the Department of Justice, they'll say, it seems to me it would be very straightforward what they'd say. They'd say, do what we say or else, and do it the way we say it. So I know I'm scared, like the rest of us, that they'll come down and slam us, and we'll be like Fairfax County and everybody will be running scared, and we'll have to spend $8 million instead of $4 million, and then we'll all be very unhappy. So, but maybe we could, in our transition plan, have a little bit of high risk, low risk, or minimum that we could spend and maximum that we could spend, and so that we at least have a range. Frankly, I'm scared of spending twice as much on our sidewalks as we do on our roads every year. I don't think the budget will stand it, regardless of how lucrative or effective the speed camera fund is or will continue to be. I'm just scared of putting that amount of resources towards sidewalks, whether it's ADA compliant or not. And I'm supportive of Ward 2 getting more sidewalks. I'm supportive of Ward 6 getting more sidewalks. Supportive of all these things, but I just want to lodge my fears about this. It's sort of like my fears about the pension numbers. I'm being fiscally conservative here. So if you can accommodate me on the high and low, some kind of range of what our transition plan could look like, I'd appreciate it.
Councilmember Clay.
I wanted to say that I think that probably a lot of the ADA compliance work that we're doing are things that we're redoing that have been poured since 1991. It was 1991 when the Act came out?
73.
It was 93.
1973, the Rehabilitation Act was passed.
Is that what applies to the sidewalks, though, or is that the 1991 portion?
I think it's the 1991 portion.
And I just wanted to say that because I think that we're at particular risk for things that we poured in concrete after the Act was passed that don't meet the standards. So I wanted to throw that out there. The other thing I wanted to say is that I did get some comments from some constituents who said that they thought that we should take all of the speed camera money and fund the police department with it, and then reduce the taxes by that amount. And the council consciously made a decision, I think, not to go that way. And I think this ADA issue illustrates one of the reasons why. But part of it is that the money has been relatively volatile, exactly, and you can't count on it. And I think it puts us at a big risk if we lose the funding, and it also puts us at a big risk if the Department of Justice comes back and smacks us on the head for that, and we end up in a compliance situation where they get to determine what it is that we spend our money on, and we end up spending all of our speed camera money on the ADA compliance because we've had some, maintenance level of effort beforehand, and you expect at least a maintenance of that level of effort, and I think that could really create some problems for us. So I think that with little exception, that the program that the city manager has put forth for the sidewalks, for the speed camera funding, is a very solid program, and there's certainly some room, there's some flexibility in it for what the council policy is and what things we might prioritize over the other. But I think that this is a solid approach that we have at this point. And I want to say the unfunded mandate thing I thought was interesting because the government puts out lots of things, and I think taking the idea about what if this was an issue around access for people of color or access of would we consider that an unfunded mandate to comply? And I think it's thinking about sort of the structure of how we create the world around us is just as important as the policies and procedures and practices that we develop. And we have a choice. We know what the issues are, and we have a choice in how we do that moving forward. And I think that is a value that I would hope that the people of Tacoma Park would support. I can't remember what the exact numbers were, but when I was at HUD, they did a study on housing discrimination, and it was the percentage of people who hung up on someone. So they had a house for rent, or they had an apartment for rent, and someone called using the TTY, the relay service, and the number of people who just flat out hung up, it was staggeringly high. I know it was over half. I 70% is the number that sticks in my head, but it was just a huge, overwhelming percentage, way beyond the levels that you saw in other kinds of things that were tested. And I think it's important for the city of Tacoma Park to be a leader in this, as it is for us to be a leader in affordable housing issues and a leader in green issues. And I think if there was a place that should do it, I think we should do that.
Councilmember Snipper.
Thank you, Mayor. I hesitate to raise this issue again, but I will anyway, because it's been talked about a bit. I have some familiarity with the court's approach to ADA issues. I mean, this memo here addresses the Department of Justice, but does not address the courts. And the courts have ruled consistently that when trying to decide whether you are doing enough, how do you measure, are you doing enough? The divisor in that is the highest level. So that would be the city's budget. So we are essentially spending $300,000, and is that enough? The courts would say that's 1.5% of the city's budget. Doesn't sound like very much. So I actually find the $300,000 that we're spending to be very low, and I think we open ourselves up to court cases as a result of spending so little. I would like to see the number increased substantially, partly to avoid the possibility of a court suit. And this the ADA has been around for a long time. It's time for us to move into compliance. And if it means checking our artwork in addition to the sidewalks, etc., I think we need to move forward on that for all the reasons that Councilmember Clay said. It's just a matter of equity here. Thank you.
The discrimination rate in that study was 50%.
50%. And Colleen, that was discrimination of people who get a phone call and they can tell it's a TTY. I don't even know what that means, but they can tell it's some kind of technology on the other end asking them a question.
This is what the study said. In the Chicago-based study, hearing-impaired people were discriminated against approximately 50% of the time when using a telephone operator relay to search for rentals. Mobility-impaired people using wheelchairs faced discrimination about a third of the time when they visited rental properties.
And what is that? What is this operator-assisted TTY?
It's a way that hearing hard of hearing.
Is there a person at the other end?
It's a particular technology with phones where when you're hard of hearing, you could do that, and there's an operator who can tell what you're saying and repeats it.
You type the message in. You type the message in, and it goes to the relay operator, who makes the call to the person who has the place to rent or the thing that you're going to do, or your friend or whatever. And the person on the other end gets the phone call, and they say, "Hi, I'm with the relay." They describe who they are, and I'm calling on behalf of. And then after that, they talk as if they're the person sort of reading the message.
It's like a translator.
Yes.
Councilmember Schultz.
Just a quick response to Councilmember Robinson's concern about whether or not we're spending enough money money on roads.
It wasn't my concern. It's not whether we were spending enough money on
relative
roads.
to sidewalks.
My concern was the amount of money we're spending on sidewalks, not on roads.
Just the comparison,
yes,
which you were focused on. But it would seem to me, though, that street repair could also be considered a public safety matter for which speed cameras could be used. I know traffic calming can, and a lot of times traffic calming involves repairing and repaving sections of roads. So I'm just wondering if speed camera money can in fact be used for road repairs, maintenance.
I've not heard it defined as that. That doesn't mean it couldn't be. I would say most people would just consider that to be typical maintenance of city infrastructure rather than an enhancement of public safety. That's my own take on it.
Cars are dangerous. Pedestrians need to be protected from them.
Big potholes are dangerous through it.
That's true.
And we've got a few in Ward 6.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. This discussion has convinced me that there really are as many opinions as there are people.
Oh, I think it's worse than that.
Or as many opinions as people get a chance to talk, right? I'm not even sure what the question is on the table anymore, but I certainly support the ADA compliance, and I will defer to the city manager's recommendation for the level of support for that right now. But I also encourage my council members again to think of ways that we can save money in this budget. Just because we're able to pay for many things this year that we didn't expect to be able to pay for, it doesn't mean that we should be spending that much money, and that maybe we could continue to look for ways to save some money.
Any other questions on speed camera fund? Before any, that's the city manager's light, okay.
No, I was just going to say, just going into the reconciliation for Monday, one of the things council may just want to consider is, as I mentioned, maybe doing a mid-year review around January 1st. It may be helpful just to give some thought and some direction in terms of, based on the numbers we have now, what is your top priority, and then maybe have sort of a second tier of items that you may want to consider funding out of the speed camera fund when we have more data around January 1st.
Okay. And just a reminder before we go to what was on the agenda as the last item, we had kind of put in, but we didn't, because all these agendas went out before we made the change on Tuesday. I've got one here, so we all got one that shows that right after we finish communications, we will have a kind of a final wrap-up council request for additional budget information, just to make sure that if there's anything that we need to get to the city manager tonight, we can do that. So we'll now move to the communications piece, and then we'll have that other final one before we adjourn.
Good evening. I'm pleased to present the information on the budget for the Communications Department, and to be joined by our two full-time staff, Alvaro Calabia and Craig Terrell, who have been working really hard and doing really exciting things this year. I think has some great things coming up. I just displaced on my communications note with transition plans note. Okay. There's information both in your binder on the communications segment as well as the handout that was in your package. The communications office mission is to use media and technology to communicate effectively regarding city services and programs. We have the City TV, which is our government access cable channel. We maintain the city's website. We maintain social media outlets, which has been new this year. We publish the city's monthly newsletter. And we also try to promote positive relations through the media about Tacoma Park. And as I mentioned, we've got two full-time staff. We also have a wide variety of part-time staff, contract employees, interns, and volunteers working with our City TV unit. As we go into FY12, we're moving primarily to contract employees and interns and volunteers. I mention this only very briefly because one of the things that's been exciting about this year is we've had this auditorium up and running, lots of events. And our City TV staff are the primary technical people related to this facility, and how we have managed to keep people coming in the evenings and weekends and do festivals and all of that has been, I think, exciting for the people involved, but also really hard to get enough people at the times that we need them. And if there are part-time staff, to keep them within the 19 and a half hours a week that they need to be limited to as part-time staff. That ends up being quite a struggle. And so we want to make sure that we have the flexibility that we need for the variety of different kinds of events and programs that we have moving forward. Let's see. The budget for the Communications Department recommended about $325,000. It represents a decrease of 6.3% from this current year, primarily due to a vacancy in personnel. The personnel-related expenditures total $158,000, represent approximately 49% of our expenditures, and a good portion of that, about 84%, is paid for out of cable franchise fees that we receive from our 3 cable television franchises, Comcast, RCN, and Verizon. That totals about $270,000 of the department's operating costs. As you know, cable TV equipment purchases are funded by our cable equipment grant funds. As we move forward into next year, we'll have almost $1.2 million in those cable equipment grant funds. Briefly, I'll go through a couple of our media outlets. We have the newsletter. It goes out monthly. We plan to continue the monthly mailing of the newsletter in pretty much the same concept, but we'll be targeting the mailing more specifically to Tacoma Park residents. That's one of the things we've been able to work with our distributor and the post office provisions to not send quite as many copies of the newsletter to people that have a Tacoma Park address in terms of their mailing address, but don't actually live within the city. And I think that will save us some funds, and it more correctly targets the newsletter. We've done some changes in the newsletter, trying to better promote the calendar of events and that kind of thing. We're looking at some of the future interactions of the newsletter and some of our electronic media as we move forward. We're not there yet. We'll talk about that when we get to that point. In the past year, we've had Craig join us in August. And since he's been on board, we've really entered the social media era. Our Facebook and Twitter outlets have become quite popular. If you'll look on our narrative, we were hoping to have about 1,000 followers of our various outlets in FY12, but because of a couple events, we're already about there. So we're moving a little faster than we had predicted even a month ago. And there's some really wonderful opportunities with the social media. We certainly used it to promote events, and people are appreciative of that. They're very important in terms of emergency information, and we are members with COG of their communications emergency division, where we get messages, communication messages, snow alerts and that kind of thing. And Facebook and Twitter is a growing aspect of getting out information for emergencies. The other thing that's been very interesting about our Facebook and Twitter accounts is that it provides a lot of back and forth communication with our residents, answering their questions, and hearing some feedback about city services that we really appreciate that we hadn't heard sometimes in our more traditional mechanisms. The biggest kind of monetary aspect of Communications Department is City TV, and I did provide quite a bit of information in your packet about our cable TV and City TV crew. As you know, we broadcast on either Channel 13 or 28 throughout Montgomery County, except for Gaithersburg. I'm curious if we might go into Prince George's County some, too. I know I get Hyattsville and some other stations through Verizon, so that's something I'd like to explore, maybe where our real message is going. And, of course, through the city's website, through the Granicus system. We, besides kind of staffing this event and staffing this auditorium's events and covering council meetings, City TV staff members produce original magazine and talk shows. They're very interested in kind of going throughout the community and making connections with people that are in the community and organizations. We've also moved into going into public service announcements, especially as both snapshot segments and public service announcements are a place where we're using young people to get them excited and interested in, and they are, in video, in doing editing, and making the connections with the rec department's use of the Media Lab. I think we've had about 9 different young people working with our snapshot segments and working with some others working on the public service announcements. So we're real happy about that. We're hoping to, get a whole influx of interns and eventual staff because we need them and we need them to keep coming in. The staff members that we have, the various contractual staff and part-time staff, are also teaching some of these classes. They help train interns, and it's really a nice kind of community, I think, within our City TV staff. I will say that Alvaro's had a good amount of time spent on recruitment and training and trying to manage this kind of growing list of activities that they've been involved in. For the FY12 budget, we're recommending $83,000 for contractual staff. That's essentially flat from last year if you combine what was contractual and what was part-time. So it kind of is about the same in terms of the overall amount, but it ends up getting divided a little bit differently. I provided quite a bit of information about the cable franchise fees, the Comcast operating grant, and the cable equipment grant. The franchise fees and operating grant are able to be used for operating activities. The cable equipment grant is pretty restricted to capital improvements and equipment. I did include information from the county's cable office package to the county council that gives definitions about how they define the capital equipment used for the cable equipment grant. And I think it's now May 31st.
Yes.
That Mitzi Herrera from the cable office in the county will be here and can talk out kind of how they use it, what the questions you may have about that. And she'll also be talking about the upcoming negotiations with Comcast over the renewal of their franchise and what we might be able to get out of that and what role, we have some legal roles, but also, what opportunities there might be to change the division of funds so it's not quite so capital heavy and can help us offset more of our city's operating costs. There's also the legislation in the Congress. It's one of the CAP Acts. It's not one of the most current ones that people have been upset about. But this particular act does have a component that would also remove the restriction of these cable equipment grants to just capital improvements. It sounds like it's getting bogged down in other areas that don't affect municipalities, or at least Tacoma Park. One of the things that, once our lobbyist kind of recuperates from the General Assembly, we've asked to have her look into a little bit and give us some report back on what she learns about opportunities for Tacoma Park's participation in lobbying on behalf of the CAP Act for Tacoma Park. The next element, and a big one and one of a lot of interest, is the city's website. We've had the same city website for a really long time. It is remarkably large and out of date and difficult to navigate, and yet it's extremely popular. It gets, 1,000 hits a day. It gets lots of interest. People come to find out about Tacoma Park is important to them. Just, they might just be curious, what's Tacoma Park? They look for jobs. They're interested in police information. Apparently there's been recent hits on budget, which is good. So we've been trying to, recently we've gotten finally some analytics that we can use on our old site to track what's important, because we're spending most of our time building a new site, which we're would love to have up today. There is information in your package about our plans for the new site, but one of the things that I'd like to draw your attention to is on the narrative part of the communications page in your budget. We have the performance workload measures, and we have average number of website pages viewed per month, and we're hoping that it goes down. We're hoping that people don't go to a new website and actually find what they want on the first page or two that they go to, and they don't have to feel like they have to dig around and figure out what it is and can they find their information. So although we want lots of people to use it, we want it to be very active and helpful, we are anticipating, and our goal is to have fewer pages viewed per session when people go to the new site. We are trying to build in, we're taking the analytics that we've installed on our current website to help direct how things should be focused on our new website. I did pass along to you access to some of the development sites, so you can look at that. There's some things about that we're excited about. I think the thing that we're most frustrated with is that we as staff haven't had the time that we needed to just put in, make sure that our pages from our various units are clean, make sense, and can be transferred to the new website. And we're also kind of in the habit, and I think many people are, where, well, somebody asked for that, so we should have it on the website. And that's not how we need to go forward. We really need to make sure that it's useful for the vast majority, or there's ways for you to contact a person or go to the cloud and download something for that extra information, to keep the website itself pretty straightforward, pretty clean, and there's also some ego in that. Well, I wrote that; it should be on the webpage. Well, maybe we don't need that. So part of it is us just learning what's appropriate on that. We're to the point where we've got quite a few departments worth of stuff on the website that we're finishing up. And then there's some units. I know Barb and I still have work to do on our part. It's not very big, and it's just us being tied down to our chairs for a few hours to do our part. And so part of this is just the recognition that some things have to be put aside for a while we do that. And I think that we're close enough where we can do that and be effective. I have tons of information, but I think I'll let you ask questions.
Do you have a sense of when the website will
The best we can say is, 60 to 90 days after the content's in, and you need to get to the mic.
First off, good evening. How are you guys doing?
You can just
You can stand up. You don't have to.
There we go.
you can raise it up with a button.
There we go.
Oh, the whole thing.
Yeah, the whole
Oh,
thing.
gee, we're going to have you play all the toys.
I
all right.
should be fine. Once I get all the material from all the different departments and I know what my content set is, I want to take 60 to 90 days to do a heavy, hardcore build. A lot of issues are presenting themselves as I get farther into the website development. They're just niggling technical issues that are built into the content management system that we are using, and I want it to be able to stand on its own legs before we let the public start playing with it. I want to make sure the code behind the scenes is clean, everything's searchable, and everything works. I think it would take 60 to 90 days once the content is all there.
Any sense of when the content will be there?
That there's so many moving parts, that's what I'm having a hard time figuring out.
We certainly have let the departments know that as we kind of completed the hard work with budget preparation, that the next major emphasis is getting the website up and running.
One thing I am doing to speed up the process is I'm juggling departments right now. I'll give one a big push while I develop, and that gives them time to come up with their content, or at least a section of their content. Then I'll develop a different department while I got one going, one in the hopper. When the one in the hopper, I get another one started, and we go around and around and around. And every time we go around, more and more gets done, and the holes are starting to get filled in. Right now, the human resources department is the closest to being done. I talked to Jonathan, I think yesterday or today, and it sounds like we're just missing some files.
So we're trying. I think it's frustrating that I don't have an actual date, but part of this is just is our direction to staff that it needs to get done.
So, sounds like 3 to 5 months, maybe 3 to 6 months.
Well, certainly we need the 3 for Craig, so that's probably right.
Yeah, I mean, once I get all the material, I can start keeping more of a, like I used to work in venture capital, I can start keeping kind of a developer schedule and just putting in, once I have all that time, I can kind of isolate my tasks and put things on the back burner a little bit, the other tasks of my job, and just, buckle down and do that. My thinking is once I get all the material from all the departments, I'm going to just do a dead sprint till it gets done. Mm-hmm. But right now, having holes in the material is just keeping me from doing dead sprint. But this time hasn't been wasted. It's been extremely valuable because I've been testing things and working with the different departments that have that represent probably about 50 to 60% of the traffic coming in, which is the city clerk and the recreation department. They also have the most tools that need to be developed. And having this kind of lag time has allowed me to develop tools that we might not have necessarily had coming in. Like your sortable tables. I built an image gallery this morning that's going to be really great for the recreation department once we get it figured out how we're actually going to use it. But yeah, the big struggle is getting all the moving parts in place.
So are there questions for them?
I just want to express the frustration on the part of behalf of all my colleagues that I think we've been waiting for this for about 2 years. And right. So any amount of frustration that gets expressed over the website is valid, and we're long suffering with this, and yesterday wasn't soon enough.
Well, and I appreciate that. The other thing, I do mention in the package, but for those who are watching, we have had staff turnover. We have had some real significant personal problems of our developer, and it's one of those things that we ask your patience, but we certainly absolutely, we have the same frustration. I'm sure that you probably have a more insistent frustration because you hear from your constituents about how difficult it is to work with the
And the developer is a contractor.
That's right.
Okay. I just have one or two quick questions, and I'll go to my colleagues. Susie, you talked in the beginning about trying to keep the part-time to 19 and a half. On the summary here, we have FTEs with benefits 2, FTEs without benefits 0. Where are the part-time converting to?
Well, for some reason they weren't counted in this same chart in the past. Not sure exactly how that happened.
But we need to get them into it?
Well, at this point, we're not going to.
But should we going forward?
In the future, we're moving away from having part-time staff.
Right. Contractors are not counted as FTEs.
Right, but I heard we have part-time who need to stay to 19
That's been up to now, but we're switching to contract.
so that we don't have any
So we will not
part-time
have
who would show up in the...
In FY12, that's correct.
Okay, I heard that we still did. And just one other thing that you briefly touched on, I was surprised to find that when I looked at my Verizon cable just a week or so ago, it was like, oh, I can watch Hyattsville City Council, I can watch College Park City Council. I had no idea that there was this cross-fertilization
Well,
across the
and it
county
was
lines.
fascinating when we were having some of our big snows and things, because I was comparing College Park and Hyattsville and Rockville about how they all covered it and how do they get the information out. It's been very helpful to have those other municipalities accessible.
Councilmember Robinson.
We're getting 1,000 hits a day. Is that what I heard?
I can, if you email me, I can send you like a snapshot of the analytic actual like art.
We're talking about today's.
Today we got
the existing. We're talking about our existing website.
Yeah, the existing website.
Okay.
We got about, I would say, 800 to. I just looked at it before I came down here.
Okay.
About
Just
7 to 800 viewers and about 1,000 page views, and that seems to be about par for the course.
Okay, so that's a hit, the page view.
A hit is when
I know there's a definitional
We don't need to get into
differential,
details.
and we don't need to go into that. So let me just. I'm hearing you that it's 1,000 page views.
Yeah, it's
Okay, but under actual FY10 in our big book. It's an NA because the analytics weren't in place fully?
That's right.
Is that right? Okay, so
Right.
there are...
And the ones that we had access to, we don't quite trust, so.
Okay, but there's a new analytic in place which is giving us these 7 or 8
Yeah,
or whatever.
the
Okay,
new-
I'm clear on that.
Yeah, the new analytics had to be installed by hand, and the old site has about almost 10,000 assets that I had to put it in.
Okay, 10,000 what's?
Just individual HTML pages that have to be tracked.
10,000?
Yeah.
There's 10,000?
That gives you an idea of the
HTML
amount of sprawl on the old site.
All right, and we're estimating close to 30,000 monthly website visits this year. Is that based on once we get the new site in place, or just including those?
That's in the current site.
Okay, and then the 35 would be in the next, with the new site. That's an estimate, right? I'm seeing that. And we're trying to get the number of pages per visit down from 4.5 to 3.25. So I'm with you.
I would expect that number, the amount of page views, to spike once the site is new because everyone's coming in and looking around. But once they settle into their normal viewing habits,
yeah. It seems like a lot of visits. 30,000 a month is 1,000 a day. 1,000 visits a day. 30,000 a month is getting to twice our population. So some people visit often, right?
And lots of people from outside of Tacoma Park spend.
Oh, and that was a question. And you're filtering out the robot visits, right?
yeah, Google Analytics is pretty smart.
Okay. By robot visits, colleagues, I mean the automated visits which sniff out where the pages are so they can stick it on Google or whatever like that, right?
Yeah, some of the individual rankings are definitely the result of some sniffers, but the sniffers that are boosting our ranks are definitely meaningful ones. I think that's why our HR pages have such a high ranking because like Monster and
I see. They come looking for job opportunities.
Exactly.
I see. Okay, cool. I'm kind of off of the website now in my comments here, and I'm thinking about staffing of the auditorium. And I see that that's one of the management objectives. And earlier we heard that Sarah is frustrated that she's spending so much of her time staffing the auditorium. So, is your goal to replace Sarah's hours here in some way?
No, that's a different activity.
Okay, and what's the differentiation between what she does and what you're doing?
Well, what Sarah does is a lot of kind of the promotion, the coordination with the performers, the making sure that, the brochures or whatever are available.
Organizing, all that
that
stuff.
side. Everything else is Alvaro's staff.
Okay.
technical.
Yeah, the scheduling of the auditorium is a little bit complicated because when a department schedule for an activity here, for example, when we want to have a production, we have to go through the rec department. Through Licia. If someone from the outside wants to schedule the auditorium, they go through Sarah. So I think that what she's talking about, all the organizational and the scheduling.
There's a lot of that.
So let me get it straight. When somebody from outside wants to schedule the auditorium, they go through Sarah.
Yes.
But from somebody, when did it go through rec?
Well, recreation has the, kind of manages, is the ultimate kind of renter of the space.
Okay.
But the facilitating of that and kind of talking through what are the various things that the artists might need and that kind of thing, it requires
Organized.
somebody who has a sense of those needs.
So that's HCD.
Right, and so Sarah has coordinated with the Recreation Department very closely, as well as facilities and with Alvaro, to make sure that it all comes together.
But all three are in play: communications, rec, and HCD.
That's right.
Yes. And Sarah's playing a central organizational role right now.
Yes.
But she's saying that's a lot of work for her, and so who is scheduled to replace her in some way or another?
In the non-departmental budget, I included $10,000 for sort of cultural event coordination. We still sort of need to work out exactly how that's going to function and what the best way to do that is, but I think what Sarah and I have discussed, Councilmember Robinson, is perhaps hiring some kind of contractor to basically do a lot of what Sarah does. Certainly there's that need to make sure that anyone booking the space, that everything is, their needs are known and it's well coordinated. I would just like to be able to have Sarah focus a little bit more on actually being the director of HCD than doing that.
I fully understand. Okay, the last thing I'll ask about is, and I see there's management objectives, and here's another kind of question I have as far as kind of content objectives. In other words, what kinds of things are we showing here, or what are we trying to promote? And the note I had here was, or is it kind of community building goals? Or community building goals one of the aspects of our content objectives? And I'm not sure that fits into the context of the communications department or HDD or rec. So sort of throw it out there. Where do we look to see if we're fulfilling those kinds of goals?
Well, I think that's a good question, how we monitor that. That might be a good resident survey kind of special question. But one of the things I haven't passed out to you is a list of the kinds of programming, in addition to just covering the events that Alvaro's staff has been doing. And, you know, the list of the folks in the community and the different connections that they've made are really, you know, it's really quite remarkable.
I'd like to see that list.
Yeah, I will share it with you. I was out during the middle of the day today and I couldn't get it out. But for, you know, even from the idea of having you and do a special information about Social Security Administration in Spanish. There's been lots of things with kind of going around the Special Olympics, the different schools, a variety of different kinds of things in the community that are getting out. And, you know, as well as the more standard stuff with our police department and with our city gardener or whatever, trying to make sure that we kind of really share the breadth of the community. And then, of course, they do the 4th of July and those kinds of
Folk
things
festival,
as well.
right.
Folk festival and a variety of
Many
kind
of
of
the
community
programs,
events.
many of the programs that we do is because the community came to us asking us to tape it. We used to do, when I came here 10 years ago, only the folk festival.
Right.
Then I said, okay, let's do a couple of performances of the street festival. Then they asked us to take the whole festival. Then came the jazz festival. Then they came to us, and for us it was good because it was easy programming. It was there. It was in Tacoma, so.
Right.
Also, the things that we cover in Snapshots is something that sometimes they come to us, oh, we have this event coming, can you tape it? Okay, we'll do a segment for Snapshots. Or they don't come to us, but we think it's interesting, or the farmers market, I like to every year or every a year and a half to cover it, just to promote it a little bit, things like that. That's what.
Thank you. I don't want to take all the time. Thank you.
Councilmember Snipper, then Councilmember Wright, then Councilmember Clay.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll keep my comments brief. I have some experience with website development, and I offer a couple of thoughts. One is that this is really directed to the city manager, actually. One thing that needs to happen, and I hope will be put in place with the new website, is a change in the business process of the city. That is, that there be an actual set of steps, guidelines, procedures for managers deciding whether whether a particular item should go on the website, how, who's going to do it, what's the timing, and so on, so that it be added on to the regular functions of people. That it not be should we put it on the website or not? It should be really part of the normal business process.
Absolutely.
The second observation is that you need content managers for the different portions of the website. There needs to be somebody who is accountable, a designated person who obviously needs to have enough time in their position description to actually do it. It could be, the approving official before something's posted or not. It doesn't have to be. And then the third point I would make is that I'm really delighted to see the use of the analytics, the counts of what things people do and how they use the website to drive the website design, because this is a really terrific way to answer that question that was raised earlier about should it go on the website or not. If it goes up on the website and nobody looks at it, then you might as well take it down. If the three most important things, the idea is to have a website where the 3 or 5 or whatever it is, most common requests are satisfied within 3 clicks, is the usual rule. Then you have a successful website. And if everyone else has to spend 5 or 10 clicks to get what they want, that's the way it is. You want to get, and you have to keep using those metrics, because those things that are of interest will change, sometimes quite dramatically. The classic is the budget comes out once a year. The rest of the year, I would be shocked to hear that the budget was a hot item on the city's website, but in budget season, it's going to be a hot item. So you have to be prepared for those kinds of surges, seasonal or whatever, on the website. And I actually think it would be a good idea not to move all the content or even substantial fractions of the content to the new website.
There's no way we would get a significant portion of what's currently there to move. It's completely unwieldy and unuseful.
And what I was going to say is you let the analytics tell you, what's missing. When people search for something, they don't find it. You look for the most popular searches, and you supply content to match that search. If nobody's searching for it, then it's gone and it can be forgotten.
Pretty much every conversation I've had with a department head, I've told them we are emphasizing efficiency and economy with everything, and I'm using the primary reason I installed the analytics in the first place was to have the data to back that up.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. Because you should not let the department head say, I really think this should be on the website. That's good enough to put it on the website the first time, or maybe even the second time, but after that, you let the analytics say, nobody cares. And, it's important to recognize the public doesn't care about something. Let's see, there was one other, yes, I'm really delighted to see the move away from PDFs. PDFs drive people nuts. They're hard to search. They're hard to index. You have to wait till they download. I mean, there's a million problems with PDFs. They're really easy for the city, but they're hard for accessibility, and they're hard for just ordinary users. So I really applaud that. The last thing I want to talk about is something you've mentioned here, the storage of documents. That kind of archival function, you should
we're actually
keep as a separate process in the sense that the things that people are actively looking for and using, that's your main website. And then essentially everything else is really in sort of an archive mode. And you can often write the web design so that's obvious to the user, so that the user, for example, when they hit search, let's say, I'll just pick that one, they're going to search the sort of active stuff. And then at the bottom of that page, you can say, if you didn't find what you were looking for, you can search the archive, and that's where the 10,000 extra pages are. That kind of two-tier, and I wouldn't do more than 3 tiers. I've seen sites that do 3. I think 2 is probably the way to go.
One thing that we did, and I just set this up last week, and I have prior experience with it in my previous job working with NCAA Sports, which has a huge archive of legacy material, is we're going to be moving the city documents, especially archive city documents, to an Amazon S3 cloud, which is, and for those of you that aren't familiar with that, it's utility-based pricing, and we'll be at the bottom tier because we're a small fish in a giant ocean, so we'll be paying probably under $1 a month to house our documents in the cloud. And that'll give Jesse some redundancy and allow us to track what documents are being used and have them available on demand, and they'll have independent URLs, so they'll be a little bit more searchable. It's just a smarter way to run our infrastructure. And I think that's a key thing to remember with the whole website, is we're building a whole infrastructure underneath of it for all of Tacoma Park's online assets.
And the last question I have is mobile access. There are a couple of ways to do this, and I hope you're building an easy way to enable mobile access on small screens, essentially.
I'm a huge advocate. If you guys know me, I'm a huge advocate for mobile access. I'm a gadget guy. Once the focus right now is building the main site's infrastructure. And I've talked to the developer extensively about how we're going to tackle this. Because of Drupal, and the way Drupal's pretty smart, and what we're going to do is we're going to build a mobile sub-site. So when a visitor comes on the site, it'll detect that you're on a mobile device, and you're essentially going to have a second site. It's going to be the same content, but it's going to be geared towards the small screen.
And do you have an automated process for the web-optimized, the smartphone-optimized web pages?
Yeah, when a visitor comes on the website, usually the website says, what device are you, what browser are you? And it's going to say, I'm Symbian, I'm Android, I'm iOS, and then it's going to spit back the mobile version of the site. Most mobile sites, I say, will have a little thing at the top, not on a mobile browser, and you'll be able to tailor your experience. I think that's going to be, once the build-out's done and once the site is live, that's going to be the next big step.
Now, the question is automating the process of creating that site so that there isn't, you're not really running 2 sites. What you're running is one site, and then maybe each night or whatever the process you develop, maybe you make the pages natively detect and, only display that portion of the page. I mean, there are several ways, several technologies for doing this. I'm just urging you to think about this up front.
And maybe we can follow up with you on that. I want to make sure that we do cover that.
Yeah, the technology that we're using to build the sites, it's Drupal. It's an open source.
I know Drupal, yeah.
Drupal has some baked-in tools that it should be pretty automatic once we get it going.
Right. Thank you.
Do we have an update on the score? We were in second overtime?
In second overtime.
Oh, Caps game?
Yes.
3-3, still tied.
3 still.
Okay.
Yeah, without the chief here, I don't necessarily know.
Councilmember Siemens was keeping me informed.
Okay.
Councilmember Wright.
I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but I just have to voice my level of frustration because I feel like I remember almost a year ago I sat in a room, I think with Councilmember Schultz when you had first come on. We sat up in, and Councilmember Siemens, we sat up in the conference room off the atrium and gave ideas about look and feel, and
Right.
it seemed like we might have it in 6 months at that point, and it's just very frustrating. I am kind of concerned or interested in kind of understanding the look and feel before it gets too baked. So if there's a way for council members to get a demonstration about how the general site is going to be or is designed and how it looks, I think that would be helpful, because one of my big concerns is that the current site is designed...
Did you look at it today?
Oh, no.
We did.
Sorry.
Okay.
We got that.
You got that.
I did provide you some links to some parts of it, and I'm happy to make sure that you have lots of opportunity.
Okay. I mean, my concern is just that it's the previous site. The site now is designed from a bureaucracy standpoint and not a customer standpoint. So, is there any way to give us an estimate of when it's going to be done? I get very uncomfortable when I hear things like, well, we have to get content and then we'll go round and round.
No,
that feels like we're going to
I
be
think that what we
going
need
round
is a
and
few
round
weeks
forever.
after this budget to be able to get an assessment and let you know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, as Suzanne sort of alluded to, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, a month ago, I mean, I did send communication to all the department heads saying, look, obviously the first priority right now is to get through the budget process. You know, this is a key priority for the council. I think what the council could do to help us is, quite frankly, give us some breathing room. I mean, part of, and Councilmember Wright, I totally understand what you're talking about. As Suzanne mentioned, we have staff turnover. We lost 5% of our FTEs in FY11, and it has been challenging. It's not an excuse. It's just a comment to really keep up on things. I think if we do a full court press on the website, and certainly that's going to take Suzanne's time in terms of kind of helping to shepherd that through with my support, but what that does mean is Suzanne is not working on the Flower Avenue Green Street project. Suzanne is not working on the ADA transition plan. So it's a matter of priority. I think certainly if this is the top priority for the council, I just need an understanding that some of those type of things that are also near and dear to your heart are going to stall out for a period of time. There's only so many hours in a day, and, I think everyone's trying to do their best, but, I can go through, kind of identify some of the things that may need to be put on hold and share that with the council and make sure we sort of have a common understanding of what's going to get done and what isn't going to get done. And I think you all have asked, have been amenable to doing that in the past.
Right. How much have we spent on the redesign so far? Do we have an estimate?
I'll check. It's actually not been a lot of money. I think the contract was for $10,000, and we're looking at maybe another $5,000. So it's not like we also, before we went into this option, we looked at other content management systems, and they were starting at $40,000 and up, and it still would take the same kind of staff work. So I think we, on one hand, we haven't spent a whole lot of money.
I think we made a lot of progress initially with the developer. I believe his child has been battling leukemia, has gone through some, times where things look to be going better and then we're not going so well. And I think as anyone who's a parent would do when that was happening with his child, he was not doing work for the city. He was spending time dealing with his child's medical condition. And that stalled out for a period of time for that reason.
And is there any way, there's lots of people out there that help build websites. Maybe it's like a content issue, but is there any way we could choose to spend a little more resources and get things done faster?
I think I think if that were the answer, I probably would have come to you in all candor, and I don't say this, probably the biggest problem has been for Craig, those of us internally being able to provide the content to him, and I think that's going to be very much an internal function, more than anything that someone contractually can help with, unfortunately.
And has anyone on our staff, Susie, Craig, Alvaro, actually overseen the building or rebuilding of a website before?
At my previous job, I was part of the infrastructure team for one of the world's largest video delivery websites. So I've worked under the hood for proprietary and open source content management systems before. So,
I don't know what you just said, but the question is, like, has anyone on the staff overseeing the true top-to-bottom redesign or rebuild or build of a website of this magnitude and this complexity?
not of this magnitude, but yes.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that, I mean, it has been really helpful having Craig, you know, kind of do the kinds of things that Councilmember Snipper talked about, really trying to be very systematic about it. I think that was something that was loose in the beginning of our process, and I really feel much better about how we're moving at this point.
Thanks, and I just want to say I appreciate the document around the use of funds. I don't think we need to go into the details of it, but it was helpful to me to understand it. My estimate is that, or my judging of like kind of the language and what things could be used for, it does seem that if we wanted to, we could use the money to make capital expenditure on doing something like WiMAX or Wi-Fi to give people access to things like the city website and Granicus broadcasting and that sort of stuff. And I would, since it seems like we have a fair bit of money in that fund, I would propose we try and think about doing that in like a pilot phase. And it seems like in council, I don't want to speak for Councilmember Siemens, but in Councilmember Siemens' ward, there's a high concentration of people who might not have the access, and also a level of density that might actually make sense to provide some version of WiMAX or Wi-Fi. We could do it in some buildings, see what happens. I think would be well worth
We'll look into it, and that's been some of the questions I've been asking the person who deals with it at the cable level, at the county level.
And before we go to the next council member, the CAPS 143 in the second.
Oh my, that's good.
Now you're up 3-1. Councilmember Clay.
I heard you mention that you were going to use a lot of volunteers.
We don't use a lot of volunteers. We do use volunteers.
You do use volunteers. Mm-hmm. So I've asked this of a couple other folks, the department heads, and you manage the department at a different level, but would you find it useful to have a volunteer coordinator who would recruit volunteers and do some recruitment and retention and maybe possible other management activities around volunteers?
Well, I think, unfortunately or unfortunately, I'm probably the closest thing to the volunteer coordinator in that I'm the person that's associated with the Volunteer Center for Montgomery County. I think it's one of these things where I don't have a problem, and I don't think any of us have problems actually coming into contact and getting volunteers. The most difficult thing that we have is making sure that we have the oversight for the volunteers, not necessarily the process of recruitment and the coordinating that, but the actual time to spend overseeing volunteers. I will say that Alvaro's shop, more than perhaps any, has such a good collaborative training system of its various staff that it works pretty well for that. And I know we have a couple that come on a regular basis and work with.
Okay. I'm just going to make a comment back to the council members. We've talked, and I think Councilmember Siemens has talked probably the most about this, about a priority to use more volunteers in the city activities. I'm fascinated that every department that I have asked said that they couldn't use the services of a volunteer coordinator, and that we don't have the capacity to train and manage them. So I guess...
But if I could interrupt, I mean, if I might say, one of the big things that we are doing, especially with the kind of city TV side, is working with the Media Lab in getting young people, and now even some seniors have been interested in that, but trained to do things so that we are able to use them. They can earn their SSL hours, and then we're hoping to actually pay them eventually, because it's, it is one of those things that once you get a little bit older, you could use some money.
Sure. But I think one of the things that I have seen out of the budget, we did some cutting last year, and no poor reflection on the staff who are now working uber extra hours to try to make it up. It's not about that. It's just that there's clearly a stress on the staff, and I think there's some level of frustration about, like, of course you have to give up things, and you drop those things. And one of the things that we talked about was the utilization of volunteers to help with some of that stuff. And so at the same time, I'm hearing from the staff that we're fine with managing the volunteers, we're fine with recruiting the volunteers. Supervision is always a challenge, and it always is with volunteers. But having somebody take that portion of the work would not free you up to do other kinds of things. And I think that at some point we should have that conversation, because volunteer management and coordination and recruitment and retention is a skill, and it's a capacity that and it's frequently undervalued in places. It's one of the first things that people cut are volunteer coordinators. It's like being in the disaster world, and the first thing everybody cuts is preparedness. But volunteers is something that they don't cut. They'll cut that people don't understand. They don't understand what volunteer coordinators can do, and I think maybe we should have another conversation about that. It's Craig, right? That's right.
Correct.
I'm very impressed with your knowledge of the website and all of the different activities that you're engaged in, and always very impressed with the City TV, and it's such a great resource for us, and the council chambers have only made it, I think, have more potential and be better. So I appreciate all of that. I will make my frustration comment about the website, and I don't think this is particularly directed to you, but maybe just sort of in general, is that I feel like more than a year ago, I sat in the communication director's office, and she showed me the mock-ups for what was going to be the new website, and I thought that they were pretty impressive, and I thought we were like a few months away from having a website. And I know we did the staff cuts and everything, and I know that changed some things, but then I went to the mock-up today, and it doesn't look a lot like I remember the old mock-ups looking, and it makes me concerned that, did we start over from scratch again and lose all the momentum that we had? Because if that's what happened, I'm not sure that's the direction I think we maybe should have gone in. And so, I hear about all this stuff, and good grief, 10,000 pages, oh my gosh. And like the metrics and the Google tools and all the underlying components, web design has moved way beyond the last time I ever designed a website. And all of that is great, but we're still sitting here with our current website. It's really difficult to find things on it. I know what all the departments are and what everybody does, and I have a hard time finding the things I'm looking for on our current website. And I just feel like if we were so close before, more than a year now out, it's not okay.
We weren't that close before.
No? Okay. So now we have, I saw the mock-ups. I don't know, maybe they're not a good demonstration of what it's going to be like, but because I don't get to see the navigation as it's just a couple of pages. And so in fairness, all I get to see is a couple of pages. The council page looks kind of like it did before, except that now we have everybody in a line. So Bruce and Josh are above the fold, essentially. And that actually happens in the secondary page as well. And I think I have the worst photo on there. I think you guys should put a new photo
Well,
of me.
we certainly can help
I think
you
we
out.
only need to give them color photos.
Yeah, well, they
Photoshopped.
They stripped mine off of one of my brochures, I think, is how, because I didn't give them that photo. But, so I don't, what I've seen so far is not as impressive as the kinds of things that you talk about. And so I have some pretty serious concerns about where we're going and when and what that's going to be like. And I can't imagine what it would be like to have a child that is having, did you say leukemia?
I think that's.
In any case, I can't. I can't imagine having a child with a terrible situation like that. You know, I grew up with somebody in my family that had severe cerebral palsy, and it was awful being a sibling, and I can't imagine being a parent. And you know, happy to work with somebody around these things, but at some point, you know, is it a $10,000 contract? I mean,
that was from the past year. Yeah, yeah.
So how about, you know, we move on and identify some more funding and get the thing built, and you know, come back to this guy when he's able to work with us around the, you know, we can come back around the maintenance or other issues, and or pick him back up again when he's ready to pick up. But in the meantime, in those gap periods when he's not able to work, could we pay a contractor to come in and keep working on it to keep the project moving?
What I would suggest is that Suzanne and I maybe talk a little bit before Monday night and just kind of working with Craig, see if there's some additional resources we could bring to bear. I don't think we're going to solve it this evening, but we'll certainly have that conversation before Monday night's meeting.
Okay.
Councilmember Schultz.
Thank you. Couple observations and some questions. I mean, I'm getting the distinct impression after listening to third evening here on our budget that when we cut 5 positions or 5% of our workforce last year, we cut too much. It sounds to me like we simply just need more staff to get the work done that we on the city council want done, because it's very easy for us, I've said this before, to say, gosh, we ought to do this and we need to do that. But it's maybe the fact is that it's being made clear to me that we don't have enough people on our staff to do all the things that we want to get done. I'll support the idea of somehow or another providing relief for Sarah Daines on the cultural work. I think that's something we need to do so that she doesn't have to focus on that and can stick to, as you said, Ms. Matthews, to the real focus of her department. I guess one question I have with regard to the building of the website is listen to Councilmember Snipper's comments about using analytics to determine what people are going to, what people are looking for, and then if it's not being, if there's not hits, then it ought to be taken down. But my experience is that a lot of people don't know what they're looking for when they go to a website. I mean, if they're looking for, say, a particular item, they may say, okay, I'll go look in the police department, and they may find what they're looking for, and then they're fine, and they get off, and they go on their way, and that shows up as a satisfactory hit. But if people don't know what's on the website to start with, then they oftentimes first may not even think to look on the website. They're not going to know maybe necessarily how to manipulate it. And so you may have content on there that needs to be on there that people simply don't know is there. Now, I realize that that's the underlying challenge that any website designer faces, just to make things as obvious as possible. But I'd like to point out that we've got an awful lot of elderly people in this city. And when I refer to elderly, I just say people 60 and over, which is in 61 and over. How's that?
You still got the same one.
PC term is like older Americans.
Seniors.
Boomers.
Well, at least I woke you all up. In my generation, I have a lot of people that I know, friends and family, who simply just don't use computers, who are obtuse about it, in my opinion. Gradually, those people need to understand and learn. I think that all of us who are used to using computers and using the web, like something, I use it every day. Can't imagine not having it. It's easy to assume that everybody's just going to quickly use the website, jump on it, figure it all out, know how to find what they want. But I'm not sure that your analytics is going to be able to give you the information that you want.
If I might, I think one of the things that is helping to drive the news site and what we want is, right now, if you want something on the web, Craig or Jesse are pretty much who are able to post anything. So if you're a department head and you've got information that you think should be out there, you kind of got to go through a system to get it up there, as opposed to through your department being able to focus on your page and have that announcement go out and somewhat automatically with the oversight that is absolutely important. But in addition to having more people be able to kind of control that information and make it quicker, we do not slight the other aspects of communication. That's why we want to continue with the newsletter. It's why the social media options have been, I think, growing remarkably and getting that information out. And, sometimes the information is post something on a kiosk during an emergency, because that's the way you can walk over there and find out where you can get some water. So I think that although we spend lots of time on the website, and we should certainly have lots of time and energy devoted to City TV, as a unit, we also don't forget that people need to get that information in many different ways. And it is absolutely essential, especially for emergency information or other critical information, that it be out in multiple different formats.
But my point is that I appreciate all the needs to do all those things, but I also just want to make sure that we don't rely too much on these internal analytics to just assume that something's not being used, because it may be, or certain pages aren't being hit, because it just may be that some people just don't know that that kind of information is available to them in the first place, particularly if you're a naive computer user. That's all I'm trying to say.
Well, I think one interesting metric, and I remember telling Suzanne about this. I ran across it a few weeks ago. Actually, it's more like a few months ago now. An overwhelming majority of our Facebook fans are over the age of 45, which I thought was kind of incredible. And that's understanding our digital audience. A lot of our audience is senior citizens. And I'm purposely keeping them in mind when I build the website. Like, with the Recreation Department, we're going to make sure we have a senior-specific section of the website. And we're building tools right into the front page that will allow us to promote, because the analytics has two sides to it. We can see what people are going to, and we can also see what they're not going to that's important, so we can promote it right on the front page. And we're building tools that can do that.
Okay.
The way you do it is you look at the searches. You look at what people are searching for, and that's how you find out what they're looking for.
Exactly.
And I hate to disagree with you, Fred, but
go ahead.
There are
we'll set it up later.
Large shelves full of books on good web design, and they say people come to a website with a specific thing that they're looking for. Very few people come and just browse around. They want to find what's the trash thing, what's the police department's phone number. And they don't,
He's photoshopping you.
they hardly ever will look at the council except to find out what our email or telephone, the pictures of folks, just a waste of time to have pictures, really. But, we have to have a small picture, I agree. And if you let that drive the design of the website and plan updating the design to match what people are looking for, then you'll end up with a good and useful website. So for me, I would get rid of the organizational parts. I just looked at the website. I would get rid of the organizational parts on the left and put popular things that people are looking for on the left. And then the design of the city would be elsewhere. But we can have this conversation offline. I'm probably getting to it.
I'd like to be able to have my time. A next question I have is that right now there's this Google or search mechanism on there. And when I put in something that I'm trying to find on our current website, and I realize this may change, is that I get all kinds of stuff that go back to ancient times.
Yes, we know.
Was that something that will be attended to?
We will not have that.
There's a lot of, for want of a better term, there's a lot of cross-pollution going on between the library's search function and the current search function. And once we build a new site, we're making a clean break with that.
It should help.
And we're just going to index the current stuff that's on the current site.
Oh, cool. That would be great. I look forward to that. Next question is, do we get to be included when it comes to content? I know you're talking to all the various departments, but the city council's not a department. We're just a bunch of elected officials.
One thing that I see, I've actually spent a lot of time thinking about this. It's not been keeping me up at night, but I've been thinking about it. One thing that I would like to do is, if you go to, like Suzanne sent you a link, and with the pictures of you guys on the right side, and there's a Google map at the bottom. I would like to have each ward have their own page and have a ward-specific news feed and a list of the listservs. So when someone, I'm new to Tacoma Park myself, and if I live in Langley Park, so I would love to know what the Langley Park listservs would be, and I'm taking that approach to how I'm building those parts of the new website as the new guy. And I would love council input on what would be meaningful for like a separate ward page.
And I think, I certainly, please let me know your interests on content. I think, just as we tell departments no on a lot of things, we might tell you no in terms of making sure that the site works. But we really are interested, and we're very much want to know what you have in mind.
I think your idea is going in the right direction. I'm wondering if it might not make sense for us members to talk to you a little bit about our ideas of what, and maybe what you're saying is just exactly what we would say we want you to do. But, because I'm not going to take the time now to talk about that. As to, in other words, what us as council members might want to have, or methods of getting stuff onto the website, etc. But let me move on if I can, in the interest of time. With regard to the television, the cable TV, I, unlike some people, find it kind of disappointing. Because whereas, everybody has a TV in their home, a lot of people have web access and all that, but I've just been disappointed in the content that I see on cable TV, notwithstanding the fact that you've identified a number of the growth in original programming, and I realize original programming takes time and money, but it just seems to me to be a resource that is literally in everybody's household. That's just not being taken advantage of in terms of providing information. It seems to me that when I turn it on Channel 13, which is what I get, mostly what I find sitting on there is folk music and jazz music from some event, which is not useful to me or interesting, so I just don't even bother. Or I'm watching the rolling business cards going by, or stuff like that, and it just, sometimes it just seems incredibly boring, and if it's boring, people are turning it off, and they're going to miss whatever good stuff you've got on there. I don't know what to tell you to do about it, because I'm too ignorant on that whole area to even begin to guess how you address these things, but I do think we need to try to get more interesting programming that's informative, real people, rather than just pictures or music, but, you know, people talking to each other and or stuff like that. And with regard, going back to the, I don't know whether you want to comment about that, Alvaro, or not. Do you?
Well, we're trying to get away from the festivals a lot, but we're talking about a question of taste, because I have a lot of people asking me for festivals, for the music. They are watched a lot from people outside Tacoma. A lot of musicians, I guess. I have, the festival.
I will say that when I first started talking with Alvaro, he says, "Can I take some of the festivals off and put some other things on?" Yes, please.
But we have much more, because I took time of festivals out of the programming, and we have much more things. We have a lot of music basically because there is something in the auditorium is easy for us to produce. It's thing that the production, the money is in editing, the time and the money. When it's something live, it might be, I might have more crew, more people working on it, but it's in the long time it's cheaper than something that you are going to edit. It's going to take you 2-3 weeks to edit. We want to do more. We're starting at the talk show that actually, I remember in October when we had the idea long ago, but in last summer I started thinking we are able now to start producing the talk show. And in October or November you contacted me. You said that why don't we do a program with the council members?
Right.
It was then the auditorium happened. We don't have time, and we done 2 shows, but we have to do more to get the logistic well planned and because we have to set up a lot of things. There is editing involved too. But hopefully next month we'll invite you to be on camera.
I think I'll stop right there. Thank you, Alvaro. I appreciate your answers.
Councilmember Stevens.
Thank you, Mayor. And, I told my wife that I'd probably be home to see the end of the Caps game. And I appreciate that the Washington Capitals tried to make that come true, but even their best efforts weren't able to help with that.
I believe I advised you at 8:30 to tell her you'd be at 11:30.
Yeah. I think one of the things, and I'm going to be very, very brief here, but I would just say that, we've talked about the extra load on staff, with the cutbacks that we had last year and the number of staff. And I think another solution to that, other than adding more staff back in, is to reduce the tasks that we ask the staff to do.
It's true.
And I think there are opportunities to do that we, I know there are many services that the city provides that have been talked about for reducing, and we've gotten pushback from the community that, those aren't appropriate, but I think there are still opportunities that we can talk about to make that happen, and don't even have to do that right during the budget process itself. Anyways, Alvaro, I really, again, want to say what I say, I think, just about every year. I think you do an excellent job with the production of the programming that you do. Again, as you know, the community would like to see a wider variety on the cable and not as many reruns. You talk some about the difficulty in doing that and the real time sink of editing is the problem. and we don't need to discuss it tonight, but I would like to suggest that that's a great opportunity for volunteers to help with the editing. And I know that there are, again, some management, supervisory responsibilities because of the price of the equipment that would be used and also the quality of the product you want to put out. But I know that unlike a lot of the rest of our budget, a lot of our cable work is funded through the, I don't know what you call it, the money we get back in ways from cable TV, the franchise money. And so I could certainly support increasing the staff in the cable TV area to, as long as it came with an addition of some volunteer assistance in that area. And so you would be increasing the staff to, at least for part of that increase, supervising the volunteers so that could help with the editing. And I don't need you could have a great opinion about that, but at this hour I don't want to hear it. You're welcome to give me the feedback on that later, okay? Because I don't think we're going to decide to do that tonight. And then just one last thing that kind of falls in line with the discussion that Councilmember Schultz had. It has to do with age. Many of my constituents are not as young as the members of this council. And I wonder, Craig, if you could just real quickly give some of them are concerned that I'm saying, yes, it's a great idea to pay somebody to be a tweeter. Could you just real quickly describe what a tweet is, how it works? And I'm looking for the abstract, not not a whole course on it.
Twitter is a service that you use through your mobile phone or your computer, and you send a message that's 140 characters in length or less. And all the people that you're friends with and that you follow see it, and they pass it along. It's text messaging on a mass scale through a free community. We have about 200 to 300 people follow us right now. And the most important function that Twitter has is notifying people of the second when something's happening. And it's often how the press, the local news organizations around here, that's how they check in on us, is they use Twitter. And I have residents often asking me questions directly through Twitter. When the new website launches, we're going to revive my TKPK, and I'm going to include a Twitter function so people can just ask me, and I will track down the city personnel.
So if people are sending you these quick questions or whatever, I mean, how much of your time do you spend tweeting?
It's not a lot of time. I usually block out like one part of the week, and that's when it goes out. Or if I get an email from someone saying, hey, can we throw this up? I've instructed city staff to pre-format that stuff, so it's just a spell check, copy, and paste.
Mm-hmm. And if somebody sends you a question, do you have to respond to it right away?
I try to. Because Twitter is such a quick format, usually it pings my desktop, I have a search, it lets me know, and usually it's something really, really silly or really easy to answer. I haven't had, someone 2 days ago just sent us a tweet asking, are we in Montgomery County or Prince George's?
Like I'm tweeting right now, laugh out loud, Terry Siemens doesn't know what Twitter is.
No, I'm talking about the constituents who are older than us on the council. I certainly knew what all this was, but I just...
I should have said LOL.
Yeah, exactly, just LOL.
Twitter, I think, has proven, a few weeks ago, we live tweeted the Purple Line meeting, and that kind of proved to me that the Twitter account that we run through the city has a lot of value. Several professional transit organizations, I was getting emails through the meeting, they started following us like that.
Right, we can maybe follow up on some of that later, but I think it has been really exciting to see some new uses about getting that information out.
Right. My purpose for these questions is, I think there are a lot of organizations in the city that could benefit by funding you, okay, and providing you with the information that you want to get out. And that also, I think there are a lot of people who live in the city. You're at your current level of you've got 200 people following, 199. You ought to have a lot more people paying attention to what's going on. Thank you.
No problem.
Councilmember Wright, you have an additional follow-up.
I just I looked at the site. I just want to echo what Ruben said, and I would really appreciate it if the city staff took some time with Ruben and took in his wisdom about how to best design the website, because I think he probably knows quite well how to do it.
Okay, I think we're about finished with this section. I'll just say one or two final things. The council, in the meantime, all agreed that they'll take little tiny pictures no bigger than a penny on whatever media it comes up on, and I get the big picture. And I just want to say that I think both of you and the people who work with you are doing a terrific job. I see you doing your job on numerous occasions. I'm in the building a lot. I see a lot that's going on. I see both of you out in the community on the street. For a while there, I thought Craig was shadowing me everywhere I went. We kept running into each other.
I thought you were following me, Bruce.
But there were about 2 weeks there where I kept running into him, and he was always working wherever I saw him. So really appreciate all the work that you all do.
Thank you.
We were going to see if there was any final chance for anybody to just make a request for any additional budget information. You can do it tomorrow to the city manager if you've got something right now.
It is almost tomorrow.
Yes, I know. We're already to the World Series. We're past hockey season. Councilmember Snipper.
Just a quick request. I've asked about this before. I would love to see a table that had historical and current levels and percentages for the unrestricted reserve. I think I've had a number of folks who want to know whether we have pots of money sitting around we could be spending. I know we don't, but it'd be nice to show the public. It's kind of the reserve in layman's term. How big is the rainy day fund?
Councilmember Clay.
I already talked to the city manager about this, but the initial presentation that was done on the budget listed I forget what it said, environmental services or environmental activities or something, and just listed some of the new activities, and I think people picked up on that to say that there was a very small percentage of the budget that was actually dedicated to the environment, when in fact there are numerous things that happen related to the environment. And I think that it would be, to the extent that we could capture at least the big pieces of that, it would be great to know what those are and what level of funding we're providing at this time.
Anything else? Thank you all.
I was just going to say, obviously it's late, I'm sure everyone's tired. If you do think of anything tomorrow, just please shoot me an email or give me a call.
If I think of anything tomorrow, I will let everybody
You will tweet it.
You'll be tweeting.
We're adjourned.